Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step softly into a covered wagon on the Great Plains, where the canvas roof shivers above you like a tired sail, the snow presses in with a million cold fingers, and the year is 1856. You're somewhere far out on the prairie, with no hotel, no glowing roadside diner, no polite little thermostat clicking obediently on the wall, just you. Your wagon, your people, your animals, and a blizzard that has absolutely no interest in your personal comfort. In fact, tiny reality check. You probably won't survive this if you treat it like a charming winter camping trip. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, tell us where you are watching from and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights and feel the boards beneath you creak as the wagon shifts in the wind. The storm does not arrive like a polite visitor. It does not knock. It rolls over the plains with a low, woolly roar, swallowing distance first, then shape, then sound, until the world outside your canvas cover becomes a moving white wall. A few hours ago, there was horizon, there was brown grass, brittle and rattling. There were wheel tracks, animal prints, little clues of human intention across the open land. Now there is only snow, driving sideways so fiercely it seems less like weather and more like a thing with a purpose. You are inside the wagon, but inside is a generous word. A covered wagon is not a room. It is a box on wheels, usually about 10 feet long and 4 feet wide, with a curved frame of bows overhead and a stretched canvas cover pulled tight against sun, rain, and, on a night like this, a frankly rude amount of frozen misery. Many emigrant wagons crossing the plains in the mid-19th century were lighter than the Grand Conestoga wagons of Eastern freight fame. They had to be. Heavy wagons sank, broke, and wore out teams. Your shelter is practical, not luxurious. It is less cozy cabin and more wooden suitcase that happens to contain your entire future. The first mainstream fact of your night is simple and important. Most travellers on overland trails did not usually sleep inside the wagon unless weather, illness, or danger forced them to. On ordinary nights, people often slept beneath the wagon, beside it, or in tents and bedrolls nearby, because the wagon itself was packed tightly with food, tools, bedding, cookware, clothing, spare parts, and all the small possessions that made leaving one life for another feel possible. But tonight is not ordinary. Tonight, the Great Plains blizzard of 1856, remembered in accounts of an especially brutal winter across parts of the Central Plains, has turned the wagon from storage space into refuge. You climb in because there is nowhere better to go. The air smells of cold canvas, damp wool, old flour sacks, leather, wood smoke clinging to coats, and the faint sour warmth of tired bodies. There is also the unmistakable scent of animals nearby, because the oxen or mules are not far away. Huddled where they can be shielded from the worst of the gale, the wagon cover trembles and snaps. Each gust makes the boughs groan, and every groan travels through the wooden frame like a warning whispered in the bones. Snow hisses across the canvas. Sometimes it strikes in dry grains. Sometimes it slaps in wet clumps. Sometimes the wind lifts one edge of the cover just enough to send a thread of icy air down your neck, which is exactly as delightful as it sounds. You pull your knees closer. The floor is not empty. It never is. A sack of cornmeal presses into your hip. A chest blocks the place where your feet would like to go. A kettle rolls softly until someone wedges it under a blanket. The wagon was built for carrying, not stretching, in better weather. You might have laughed at the idea of fitting everyone in here for the night. Now, nobody laughs very loudly. Laughter wastes warmth, or at least it feels that way. Even sarcasm has to wear mittens. Outside, The storm erases the familiar world so completely that your sense of direction begins to fade. On the plains, sight matters. Trails are not always roads in the modern sense. They may be ruts, river crossings, landmarks, clumps of trees, distant ridges, or the remembered angle of yesterday's travel. But snow turns each clue into sameness. The wagon, with its curved white cover, becomes a tiny island in a white sea. You can hear the wind push against it from one side, then another, as if testing the structure. It is a little like being inside a drum while the sky practices badly, and still you must sleep. That is the strange truth at the heart of this night. Survival does not mean staying heroically awake until morning, staring into the blizzard with dramatic cheekbones. Survival means resting whenever you can, even badly. It means warming your fingers under your arms. It means tucking a child between adults. It means deciding which sack can be moved, which chest can be leaned against, and which person gets the place furthest from the draft. It means accepting that your bed is not a bed tonight. Your bed is whatever space remains after necessity has taken the first claim. There is a quirky little tidbit worth tucking into the folds of this scene, like a spare mitten. Some emigrants believe that hanging blankets, quilts, or even old clothing along the inside of the wagon cover helped block drafts and keep frost from forming directly overhead. In a strict scientific sense, this was only partly useful, because damp fabric could freeze, sag, and make everything feel heavier. But in a psychological sense, it mattered. A lined wagon felt more like a room felt more like home, and home, even when it is made of old quilts and wishful thinking, can help a person breathe more slowly. Historians still argue whether the worst suffering in storms like the 1856 blizzard came from the cold itself, or from the sudden collapse of movement, supply, and decision-making once the weather trapped people in place. Cold is obvious. You feel it immediately. It bites your fingers and stiffens your boots. But being stuck is quieter. It creeps into the mind. The wagon that carried you forward becomes still. The animals cannot travel safely. The trail has vanished. The next settlement, crossing, or grove of timber might as well be on the moon. So you sit inside your narrow shelter and understand that sleep is not separate from the journey. Sleep is part of the machinery of survival, just like wheels, harness, flour, and fire. You listen to the others settle around you. Someone whispers a prayer, someone mutters about the weather. Because even in 1856, people understood the healing power of complaining. A child asks whether morning will come soon, and an adult says yes, because that's what adults say in the dark. The answer may be hope rather than knowledge, but hope is useful. It weighs almost nothing, fits anywhere, and can be shared without unpacking a trunk. The wagon rocks gently, not enough to roll, not enough to move forward, only enough to remind you that the storm is stronger than the walls. The canvas sags a little where snow gathers. A hand reaches up with a stick or broom handle to tap it loose, and the snow slides down outside with a soft rushing sound. For a moment, the cover lifts again, then the wind presses it close. You tuck your chin beneath a blanket. The fabric smells of smoke and lanolin, of travel and many bodies. It scratches your cheek, but the scratch is almost comforting, because it belongs to something human-made. Beyond it lies a world too wide, too cold, and too empty for comfort. Inside it, you hear breathing, uneven, tired, or close. That is the sound of your shelter now, not the wheels, not the team, not the road westward, just breath in a box of boards and canvas. You are not sleeping well, nobody is, but you are lying down, you are preserving heat. You are learning, one stiff inch at a time, how a covered wagon becomes a bedroom when the prairie turns dangerous. The storm keeps speaking in its low, endless voice, and you answer by becoming small, quiet, and careful, making room for the night that has only just begun. You begin making a bed from cargo because there is no other sensible thing to do. The storm has folded the prairie into darkness, and the wagon, already cramped, must become a bedroom. Pantry, storeroom, nursery, and shelter all at once. It is a ridiculous assignment for a wooden box on wheels. But the wagon accepts it silently, which is more than you can say for your knees. The first task is finding space, not comfort. Exactly. Comfort is a city word tonight. Space is the prize. You and the others shift sacks, boxes, tools, and bundles with slow, careful movements, because every object in the wagon matters. A careless shove might spill flour, crack a crock, bend a lantern, or send a tin cup clattering into the dark. You move as if the cargo's asleep too. A bag of meal is dragged closer to the rear. A folded tent is pressed against the sideboards. The bedding roll, stiff with cold, is pulled free from under clothing. A small chest, too heavy to move far, becomes a wall for someone's feet. A mainstream historical fact settles into this scene like a practical aunt with cold hands. Emigrant wagons were often packed according to need and balance, with the heaviest supplies low and near the centre, to keep the wagon from tipping or breaking an axle on rough ground. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, tools, cookware, bedding, and sometimes seed competed for every inch. Sleeping inside meant disturbing a system arranged to survive hundreds of miles. So when the blizzard forces you inward, you are not simply climbing into a cosy nest, you are rearranging your whole economy. The wagon floor is a map of compromises. You can feel the seams between boards through your mittens. Snow has found its way in at the rear flap and melted into a damp smear that will soon harden again. The cold rises from below as if the earth has teeth. You spread the first layer not because it is soft, but because it separates flesh from frozen wood. A feed sack goes down, then a folded quilt, then perhaps a buffalo robe if your party has one, heavy and musky and unfashionable by standards. The buffalo robe is precious. It is thick, hairy, oily in the way natural insulation often is, and it holds warmth better than many woven blankets when the temperature drops brutally low. It also smells, not like a candle named Winter Frontier. It smells like animal hide, smoke, sweat, dirt, and every mile behind you. But as you kneel on it, its dense warmth rises through your stockings, and suddenly you forgive it many sins. The bedding is not placed flat like a modern mattress. There is no room for that elegant nonsense. Instead, it is folded, tucked, wedged, layered in strips and corners. You build a nest with geometry invented by exhaustion. One person lies along the side, another curls near the tailgate. A child is placed crosswise, because children can sleep in positions that would send an adult directly to a bone doctor. A baby, if there is one, is wrapped close to a mother's body, where breath and heartbeat form the smallest possible hearth. Cargo becomes furniture. A flour barrel makes a backrest. A toolbox becomes a hard but stable pillow. A bundle of clothing fills the gap between a chest and the sideboard so that no one slides into it during the night. Cookware is wrapped in cloth to stop it from rattling. A skillet, badly placed, can become a midnight enemy. Nobody wants to wake with a frying pan pressed into the ribs, though history rarely pauses to ask what anyone wants. Here is a quirky little tidbit, soft and odd as a mitten found in the flour sack. Some travellers stuffed loose straw, hay, dry grass, or even spare toe linen into gaps around sleeping places when they could, not only for warmth but to stop drafts from crawling along the floor. In emergencies, people sometimes used empty grain sacks filled with whatever dry material they could find as temporary pads. It sounds humble, and it was, but the principle is beautifully modern trap air. Block drafts, stay alive. Your great survival innovation tonight may be a lumpy sack of hay. As the cargo shifts, The wagon speaks in small noises, pegs creak, the sideboards complain, a lantern hook taps softly overhead. Outside, the wind presses snow against the wheels and undercarriage, packing it around the wagon like cold mortar. Inside, every movement is negotiated. Move your foot, not there. Careful with the crock. Who has the dry blanket? Voices stay low, partly from tiredness, partly because loudness feels wasteful in the dark. A low voice tells the children this is ordinary, even when the adults know it's not. Historians continue to debate whether families on the plains improvise mainly from long-practice rural habits or adapted rapidly to trail conditions that had no exact eastern equivalent. You may have known how to make a pallet on a cabin floor back home, how to stretch bedding for guests, how to keep babies warm in winter. But this is different. The wagon is narrower, the floor moves. The supplies cannot be scattered freely. The cold comes from every direction, not just a leaky wall or an open chimney. The prairie does not behave like a house, and so your bed cannot behave like one either. You tuck a rolled coat beneath your neck. It smells of sweat, wood smoke, and snow. The buttons press into your skin, so you turn it, flatten it, turn it again, and accept that one button will be your companion. A sack of dried apples is pushed near your shoulder. You can smell them faintly, leathery and sweet under the stronger odours of wool and hide. Somewhere nearby, a tin cup has been wrapped in a stocking to quiet it. This is what domestic order looks like during a blizzard. A cup wearing a sock, a child sleeping on a trunk, and an adult whispering thanks for a sack of beans because it blocks a draft. There is tenderness in the arrangement, though no one names it. The driest blanket goes beneath the oldest sleeper's hips. The warmest robe is shared where the children can reach it. Someone gives up the better corner without ceremony, then pretends not to notice. Survival often looks like grand courage in paintings, all heroic profiles and windblown hair. Inside the wagon, it looks like moving a crate 3 inches so someone else can straighten a leg. The floor still hurts, the air still cuts, the storm still snaps the canvas above your face, but the wagon is changing under your hands. It is no longer only loaded, it is arranged. It is made human by deciding where bodies should rest. You have built a bed from cargo, a mattress from memory, a shelter from objects meant for other purposes. Around you, the supplies that carried the journey now hold the night, and as you lower yourself into the narrow space left for you, the wagon seems almost ready to let you sleep. The canvas walls breathe with the storm, not gently, not like lungs at rest, but in sharp pulls and sudden shudders, swelling inward when the wind strikes, relaxing when it passes, then snapping tight again with a sound like a sail losing patience. You lie beneath it, and understand that a covered wagon is less a shelter from nature than a polite suggestion made to nature. Nature, tonight, is not impressed. Above you, the canvas is stretched over bent wooden boughs, arcing from one sideboard to the other. In fair weather, that white or weathered cloth gives shade and keeps off a mild rain. In a storm like this, it becomes the thinnest wall between your breath and the blizzard. It is treated with oil, paint, or other water-resistant mixtures when families can manage it, because plain cloth drinks rain like a thirsty horse. Even so, weatherproof does not mean warm. Weatherproof means the snow is mostly outside, which, to be fair, is a meaningful achievement. The mainstream fact tucked into this cold little room is that wagon covers were usually made of heavy canvas or cotton duck, fastened over hoops and often drawn at the ends with flaps, ties, or closures. They helped protect goods from sun and rain, but they did not turn wagons into insulated houses. A cabin wall has thickness, a wagon cover has attitude. That is not quite the same thing. You can hear the difference. A real wall dull sound, canvas translates it. The storm speaks through every fibre. Snow rasps across the surface in dry, whispering streams. Gusts slap the side with a flat crack. Loose ties flick against the frame. The fabric creaks where frost stiffens it. When the wind shifts, the whole cover trembles overhead, and the wagon bows flex just enough to make you imagine them giving way. Although they probably will not. Probably is such a soothing word when you're trying to fall asleep under frozen cloth. Your breath rises and meets the cold roof. At first it vanishes into the dark. Then, as the night deepens, it begins to return to you. Moisture gathers on the inner canvas, on wooden ribs, on the underside of any hanging blanket used to line the cover. A faint glitter forms where breath freezes, when someone moves. Tiny crystals shake loose and drift down like the world's least welcome bedtime confetti. You blink one from your lashes. Another lands on your cheek and melts there. A cold kiss from poor ventilation. The air inside the wagon is warmer than the storm outside, but only by comparison. Warm bodies make a small climate. Wet wool, damp boots, and human breathing add moisture. The canvas traps some of it, especially when the ends are tied close against blowing snow. Yet if you open the flaps for air, the wind slides in and steals warmth. If you close them tight, the air grows heavy and damp. You are learning a lesson that people in cold shelters have known forever. Comfort is not one thing. It is a bargain among warmth, dryness, air, and not waking up with frost on your nose. A quirky tidbit comes rustling in with the canvas. Some wagon owners rubbed covers with linseed oil, beeswax mixtures, or paint to make them shed water better. And a few accounts mention covers becoming stiff, dark, and smelly after repeated treatments. Imagine trying to sleep under a roof that smells faintly of oil, mildew, smoke, and every rainstorm since Missouri. Very bar-like. If the spa has been abandoned by reasonable people, the smell changes as the canvas chills. During the day, under sun, it may smell dusty and warm. Tonight it smells damp, sour, and mineral, like wet cloth left too near cold iron. Every time the wind presses it inward, that smell comes closer. The canvas almost touches hanging blankets where the inner lining sags. A hand reaches up now and then to push the cloth away from bedding, because if damp canvas rests on a blanket, the cold crawls through both. Touch becomes part of survival. You learn what is wet, what is merely cold, what is stiffening, what can be ignored until morning, and what must be fixed now. Somewhere near your feet, a draft slips through a gap where the rear flap does not close cleanly. It moves with purpose, narrow and mean, touching ankles, then calves, then disappearing under a quilt. Someone stuffs a shawl into the opening. The draft pauses, considers its options, and finds another path. This is the personality of winter, persistent, inventive, and frankly a little nosy. Historians have not reached full agreement on whether emigrants feared moisture inside wagons as much as direct cold, especially during emergency storms. Some journals complain bitterly of wet bedding and frozen clothes, while others focus on wind, hunger, or exhausted animals. But as you lie here, listening to breath become frost above your face, the distinction feels artificial. Dampness makes cold intimate. Dry cold can be endured with layers. Wet cold sneaks inward, flattening wool, chilling skin, and turning sleep into a sequence of small awakenings. The darkness has texture. It is not empty. You see the faint curve of the cover when snowlight leaks through from outside. The fabric glows in patches, dull grey where snow presses against it, black where a blanket hangs, silver where frost catches the last coal-coloured gleam from a covered lantern. The wagon's ribs make shadows like the inside of a whale, or perhaps that is too dramatic. More accurately, you're inside a creaking grocery crate with aspirations. Still, there is a strange intimacy to canvas. It does not hide the storm, but it holds it at a distance. You hear every threat softened by a layer of cloth, You hear the prairie roaring, but not directly in your ears. You see nothing of the open plain, and that is a mercy. The world outside has become too wide to think about. The canvas narrows it, it says. Here is your ceiling, here is your dark, here is the space where breath continues. Someone shifts beside you, and the entire bed of cargo adjusts. A sack settles. A board knocks softly. The cover snaps so loudly that a child flinches awake, then is soothed by a hand under the blanket. No one begins a new story. No one announces a chapter of hardship. The night simply moves on, one gust at a time. You pull the blanket higher and feel condensation cooling the edge near your mouth. You turn your face slightly, breathing into a pocket of wool warmed by your own body. Outside, snow piles against the wagon wheels, muting the lower sounds. Above, the canvas keeps talking. It drums, sighs, rattles, and stiffens. It is not a good roof, not by any comfortable standard, but it is the roof you have. Under it, frozen breath becomes part of the bedding, the storm becomes part of the room, and the idea of sleep becomes thinner, quieter, and more careful than before. You share heat because the wagon has no better invention to offer. There is no stove glowing politely in the corner, no thick plaster wall holding yesterday's warmth, no neat stack of dry firewood waiting beside a hearth. There is only body warmth, trapped under layers, passed from sleeve to sleeve, blanket to blanket, breath to breath. The idea sounds tender until someone's cold boot finds your shin. Then it becomes tender with consequences. The people inside the wagon move closer by necessity, not sentiment. A shoulder presses into your arm, a child's elbow digs into your side, someone's knee is exactly where your hip wanted to be. The arrangement is not graceful, but it is efficient. Human bodies give off heat steadily, and in a storm like this, closeness is not merely affectionate, it is technology, not elegant technology, perhaps. More like the original group chat, but with wool socks and mild resentment. One reliable detail from 19th century overland travel is that blankets, quilts, and robes were essential equipment, often listed carefully among family supplies before departure. Bedding was not a decorative afterthought. It was protection against rain, frost, insects, dust, exhaustion, and the hard ground. Families might carry wool blankets, homemade quilts, coverlets, feather beds, if they had space, and animal skins if they could acquire them. In this night of blowing snow, those choices made months earlier return as warmth or regret. You feel the difference between materials. Wool holds heat even when a little damp, though it smells strongly of sheep, smoke, and human effort. Cotton quilts feel familiar and homelike, but if they become wet, they chill quickly and sag into cold weight. A buffalo robe is heavy, almost rude in its thickness, but wonderfully warm when laid hairside inward or used over the top to trap heat. A feather bed, if one has survived the journey and not been discarded to lighten the load, is a treasure. It compresses in the cramped wagon, but it still softens the boards beneath aching ribs. Layers matter more than any single heroic blanket. A sack goes below, a quilt above it, wool next, a robe over the sleepers, coats fill gaps, shawls wrap heads and shoulders, mittens stay on, because hands left bare become useless little complaints. Stockings are doubled if possible. A scarf covers the neck, a bonnet or cap stays tied under the chin, even indoors. Because indoors is now a theoretical concept. You tuck your hands beneath your arms and feel the warmth trapped there. It is one of those simple gestures people rediscover in every cold century. The skin of your wrists and fingers prickles painfully at first, then dulls. Your toes are less cooperative. They remain distant citizens, sending unhappy reports from the far end of the blanket. You flex them quietly, trying not to kick the person sleeping across from you. Courtesy survives, barely. A small oddity from winter travel is that some families warmed stones, bricks, or wrapped metal objects near a fire and brought them into bedding when conditions allowed. On a night with poor fuel and dangerous wind, you may not have that luxury, but the idea lingers. People did what they could, heated flat irons, stones, or filled vessels near warmth, wrapped them in cloth, and used them at feet or under blankets. It sounds clever, and it was. It also sounds like a delightful way to discover whether someone wrapped the hot stone properly. Frontier comfort always comes with a little footnote saying, "Please do not burn yourself." Tonight, though, the main heater is the cluster of bodies under shared cover. The children are placed between adults, not at the edges. The smallest one breathes warmly against a sleeve. An older child complains about being squeezed, then falls asleep almost mid-complaint, which is a talent children have carried through history like a secret inheritance. Someone shifts the buffalo robe so it covers the child's feet. Someone else gives up a fold of shawl without speaking. Researchers disagree about how often emigrant families slept communally inside wagons during severe weather, partly because diaries tend to record unusual hardship rather than ordinary arrangements. A night like this may be described in a few fierce lines: snow, cold, no fire, poor sleep, the actual choreography, who lay where, who surrendered which blanket, who woke to pull a quilt back over a child, often goes unrecorded. Yet this is where the night truly happens, not in the dramatic sentence, but in the repeated small corrections. The cold keeps searching for weaknesses. It finds the place where the blanket lifts near your shoulder. It enters when someone turns. It slides along the sideboards and under the bedding layers. You learn to seal the edges by tucking fabric beneath hips and knees. You learn that a shared blanket works only if nobody rolls too far. One restless sleeper can open a draft tunnel large enough to chill 3 people, which feels personally unfair but historically authentic. Outside, the animals stamp and breathe. Inside, your group becomes still, then restless, then still again. Heat builds slowly. At first, every touch feels cold, cold sleeves, cold stockings, cold hair against your cheek. Then the layers begin to work. The space beneath the robe grows warmer. Breath softens, shoulders unclench. The wagon no longer feels warm, but it feels less hostile. That is tonight's luxury. There is a faint dampness where breath has collected in the fabric near your face. You turn toward the centre of the bedding, away from the canvas wall. The person beside you smells of wool, smoke, and sleep. This closeness would be awkward in bright daylight, when everyone is busy pretending to have personal space. But darkness changes the rules. In the dark, warmth has rank. Modesty adjusts itself under quilts and necessity. You're all trying to preserve the same fragile pocket of heat. A grandmother, perhaps, or an older aunt, if she travels with the party, knows the value of covering the head. She mutters that heat leaves through the scalp, which is not completely true in the way people usually say it, but also not useless advice when your cap has slipped sideways and your ears are freezing. You pull the cap lower. No one needs exact physiology tonight. They need ears. A hand reaches in the dark to check a child's feet. They are cold, but not stiff. The child is drawn closer. Someone rubs small toes through stockings, slow and practical. The motion creates warmth, but it also creates reassurance. Touch says what no one wants to say aloud. We are still here, still together, still managing. You listen to the layered breathing around you. Each person's rhythm differs. A child whistles softly through a stuffy nose. An adult sighs in short bursts, waking whenever the canvas snaps. Someone murmurs in a dream. The shared heat has made the wagon feel smaller, but also safer. The storm can rattle the cover, pack snow against the wheels, bury the ruts, and howl across the prairie. And howl. but it cannot easily separate the warm little knot of people under the robe. So you settle into this pressure of bodies and blankets. You accept the elbow, the cramped ankle, the hard edge of a crate beneath the bedding. You accept the smell of damp wool and animal hide. You accept that your privacy has gone wandering somewhere outside in the snow and may return in spring. The layers hold. The breath continues. Warmth, modest and borrowed, gathers slowly under the covers. And in that shared human weather, sleep comes nearer. The children and elders are tucked deepest inside, as if the wagon has a heart and they must be kept near it. You feel the arrangements settle around them, not neatly, because nothing is neat in a storm, but with a quiet order that everyone understands. The strongest bodies take the edges, the more vulnerable ones are placed away from the flaps, away from the canvas wall, away from the places where the wind has little sharp opinions. It is not a ceremony. It is simply how people behave when cold turns every inch into a decision. A child protests at first, because being wedged between adults under heavy blankets feels unfair when you're young and still believe comfort is a right protected by law. There is no law here except warmth. The child wriggles, complains about a knee, asks whether the snow will cover the whole wagon, and then grows quiet when a hand smooths the blanket at the shoulder. Another child sleeps already, mouth open, cheek flushed from the shared heat. One mitten half off. Someone gently pulls it back on. The mitten is damp at the cuff, and the fingers inside are cool, not dangerously cold, not yet, but cool enough to make the adults exchange a look in the dark. One well-grounded fact of overland family travel is that wagon parties were often made up of mixed ages, from infants to grandparents, though the exact makeup varied widely. Migration was not only the journey of bold young men striding westward with heroic jawlines and suspiciously clean boots. Families travelled together. Children walked when they could. Older relatives rode when the trail allowed. Illness, pregnancy, age, injury, and exhaustion all shaped who slept where and who needed protection when weather turned savage. Inside the wagon, the oldest sleeper is given a place where movement will disturb them least. Perhaps it is against a stable bundle of bedding, perhaps near the centre where the heat gathers, perhaps with a rolled coat under the knees to ease aching joints. Cold finds old injuries quickly. It settles into fingers that once worked fields, knees that climb into mine, wagon steps too many times, backs that have lifted barrels, babies and burdens for decades. You hear a quiet groan as someone shifts, followed by the immediate apology of a person trained by hardship not to ask for too much. The night watch begins almost without being named. Not everyone can sleep at once. The storm is too loud, the animals too exposed, the fire too uncertain, the trail too vulnerable beneath the snow. One adult stays awake longer, listening, then another. The duty passes in fragments rather than formal turns. A person wakes, notices the canvas sagging, taps snow loose. Another hears an ox pull at its tether and lifts their head. Someone checks whether the rear flap has loosened. Someone touches a child's face, not to wake them, only to be sure the cheek is warm. A strange little detail from trail life is that parents sometimes used ordinary objects as nighttime signals in cramped quarters. A cup placed in a certain spot, a shawl tied near a flap, a lantern kept unlit but within reach. These could help a half-awake adult find what was needed without rummaging blindly. It was not a grand system, it was domestic navigation by habit. In your wagon tonight. The dipper hangs in the same place. The medicine bottle is wrapped in cloth in the same corner, and the extra stockings are beneath the same bundle. Tiny order keeps panic from becoming fashionable. The wind rises again. It comes in long waves, each one beginning far away as a low pressure of sound, then swelling until the wagon cover thrashes above you. The children stir. The older sleeper mutters something from a dream. You hold still. Because stillness comforts others. It says the sound is only weather. It says the wagon is still standing. It says no one needs to sit up yet. Historians differ on how much emotional reassurance, rather than practical protection, shaped sleeping arrangements in immigrant and emigrant wagons. Written records often focus on numbers, miles, deaths, prices, repairs, rivers, and weather. They rarely pause to explain how fear was managed after dark, but fear must be managed. A child who panics kicks off blankets. An elder who feels abandoned may try to rise and help when rest is safer. A group that sleeps in distrust wakes weaker. So the arrangement of bodies is not only about heat, it is about calm. Who lies beside whom, who can hear a familiar breath, who can reach a hand in the dark. You become aware of listening as a physical act. Your ears strain until the storm has layers. There is the canvas slap overhead, the snow hiss along the sides, the dull thud of accumulation sliding from the cover, the muffled shifting of animals outside, the little interior noises, a cough swallowed quickly, a blanket tugged, a wooden chest creaking under a sleeper's foot. Every sound asked to be interpreted. Is that the wind? Or has something come loose? Is that an animal settling? Or an animal in trouble? Is that child breathing normally or too quietly? This is why the night watch matters. Sleep in the wagon is not a single surrender. It is a chain of partial surrenders, one person dozing while another remains near the surface of waking. The watchful adult does not sit dramatically with a musket across the knees, though perhaps a firearm is somewhere among the goods. More likely, they lie half-propped on an elbow, wrapped in a coat, eyes open to darkness, counting breaths and gusts. Very cinematic. Yes, if your idea of cinema includes numb feet and a flour sack in your spine, a small hand finds yours under the blanket. The child is asleep but searching, fingers curling around two of yours. The grip is light. You do not move. The warmth of that hand is shocking in its trust. The storm can erase the trail, bury the wheels, and press the wagon into silence. But this sleeping child assumes someone is there, so you are. The elder near the centre asks for water. The word is barely more than breath. Water is complicated now. The canteen may be partly frozen. The cup is cold enough to sting. Someone works the stopper loose, pours a little, and helps lift it. The drink is small, because no one wants to waste it or spill it into bedding. A wet blanket would be an enemy until morning. The elder drinks, nods, and settles back with the dignity of someone pretending not to need help. Everyone politely accepts the performance. The watch shifts again. You're not sure whether minutes or hours pass. Time loses its hard edges in the wagon. There is only before the last gust and after the next one. The children sink deeper into sleep. Their faces, shadowed by caps and blanket folds, look peaceful in brief moments, almost absurdly peaceful. Children can sleep through calamity once they trust the adults have taken responsibility for it. Adults, naturally, get the privilege of lying awake and wondering whether responsibility has read the weather correctly. Outside, the prairie remains invisible. Inside, the vulnerable sleepers are guarded by layers of cloth, cargo, habit, and attention. You understand that sleep here is communal work. The person who rests depends on the person who listens. The person who listens depends on the warmth of those resting nearby. The weakest are not left to manage the night alone. They are folded inward, held close, watched over, and carried through the dark one breath at a time. The animals breathe beside you, not inside the wagon exactly, but close enough that their presence enters the night like another layer of weather. You hear them through the canvas, through the snow, through the boards, through the exhausted quiet between gusts. Oxen, horses, or mules are not background details on this journey. They are the engines, the bank account, the alarm system, the worry, and sometimes the smell, which is a very complete resume. Outside, the team shifts against the storm, A hoof scrapes packed snow, a chain knocks lightly, leather creaks where harness has stiffened with cold. One animal blows hard through its nostrils, making a damp. Rough sound that turns instantly into vapour. Another stamps, not dramatically, just enough to keep circulation moving. The snow muffles everything below the wagon, so each sound arrives softened and uncertain. You listen for distress, but distress does not always announce itself politely. A dependable historical detail worth remembering is that oxen were widely used on overland trails because they were strong, relatively steady, cheaper than horses, and able to survive on rougher forage. Though they moved slowly, horses and mules had advantages too, especially for speed or riding, but oxen were common draft animals for emigrant wagons. In a blizzard, the choice mattered. An animal that could endure poor grazing, cold, and long labour might be the difference between moving again when the weather broke and becoming a sad little footnote in someone else's diary. The smell of the animals reaches you in waves whenever the wind shifts. It is warm and sour, grassy and damp, mixed with manure, wet hide, leather, and frozen earth. Modern noses might object. Modern noses are spoiled. To you, this smell means life. It means muscle waiting under snow-crusted hair. It means the wagon may move again. It means the journey has not lost its legs. The animals cannot simply be left anywhere. If there is a lee side of the wagon, a bank, a shallow hollow, or any scrap of shelter from the wind, they are placed there if the wagon has been drawn into a small circle or beside another wagon. The teams may be positioned where canvas, boxes, and bodies create a little barrier. In more organised wagon companies, livestock might be gathered as safely as conditions allow, but in a sudden plains blizzard, safety is often improvised with numb fingers and bad visibility. You imagine someone outside earlier, fighting the wind to secure tethers. Rope burns even through gloves, knots stiffen, buckles resist. A frightened animal can pull loose, and on an open white plain, a lost ox in a blizzard is not a charming rustic inconvenience. It is a crisis with hooves, so the animals are checked, tied, sheltered as best they can be, and fed if feed can be reached without losing half the camp to the storm. Then the humans crawl back under canvas and pretend sleep is possible. A peculiar note from trail life is that some travellers trusted their animals' instincts about weather and direction more than their own senses in certain conditions. Oxen might turn their backs to wind, refuse a dangerous crossing, or become restless before a storm fully showed itself. Of course, animals also wandered, panicked, or made choices based on grass rather than destiny. So one should not turn the family ox into a mystical weather prophet. Still, when the world outside has vanished, the sound of an animal settling calmly can comfort you in a way no speech quite can. The warmth from the animals does not enter the wagon like stove heat, but it changes the feeling of the camp. Their bodies create a living cluster near the shelter. If they stand close enough, they block wind. Their breath thickens the air around them. Snow piles against their legs and flanks, then breaks when they move. Their presence makes the open prairie seem less empty. You are not alone with the storm. There are other warm creatures enduring it, patient in ways that make humans look frankly theatrical. Inside the wagon, the children hear them too. One child asks whether the oxen are cold. The answer comes softly, yes, but they are strong. This is both reassurance and prayer. Another adult mutters that the animals have more sense than people, and no one argues, because people voluntarily cross this landscape with a house made of cloth and optimism. The oxen, at least, were not consulted. Researchers continue to question how often livestock losses during winter storms were underreported in family accounts, especially when diaries compress terrible nights into a few practical lines. Losing an animal could mean delay, hunger, debt, abandonment of supplies, or the end of a journey. Yet some writers mention such losses briefly, almost stiffly, perhaps because grief over an ox or mule sat strangely between property loss and companionship. You may not call the animal family. You may still lie awake counting its breaths. The storm intensifies and the animals grow more restless. A hoof thumps, a tether strains, one of the men, or perhaps one of the older boys, lifts his head from the bedding. No one wants to go out. The thought of leaving the shared warmth is almost cruel, but if an animal breaks loose, sleep is finished anyway. For a moment, the wagon holds its breath. Then the sound settles. The animal snorts, shifts, and stands. The watcher lowers himself again, not relaxed, only postponing the next worry. You picture the team in the stormlight. Snow clings to eyelashes and manes. Ice rims the hair under chins. Their backs are turned to the worst wind, tails tucked, heads low. If blankets or coverings are available, they may have been thrown across them. Though keeping such coverings in place is its own comedy of knots, gusts, and animal opinions, feed bags may hang from necks if grain is available. More often, the animals wait, conserving heat, chewing slowly if there is anything to chew, their great sides moving in the dark. The wagon itself seems to respond to them. A tether tied to a wheel or axle sends small vibrations into the frame. A bump against the sideboard travels into your shoulder. You feel the animals not just as sounds, but as tremors. The whole camp is connected rope to wheel, wheel to wagon, wagon to bedding, bedding to your ribs. This is not romantic, exactly, but it is intimate. The journey is a system of bodies, wood, leather, breath, and trust. The smells deepen as the night grows older. Damp wool inside, damp hide outside, as smoke in blankets, manure freezing near the wheels, leather soaked, then stiff, flour sacks and human breath and the faint sweetness of dried apples is somewhere by your shoulder. It is not pleasant in the modern scented candle sense. It is grounding. It tells you the world remains physical and near. Fear likes emptiness. Smell fills emptiness with evidence. You drift near sleep and are pulled back by a long animal exhale. It sounds almost like a sigh. Perhaps it is only breathing. Perhaps you give it meaning because you need company. The ox outside endures the storm without language. And you, wrapped in quilts and pressed between cargo and kin, borrow courage from that steady animal patience. If the team can stand through the night, maybe the wagon can hold. If the wagon can hold, maybe morning can find you. And if morning finds you, stiff, smoky, cramped, and smelling faintly of livestock, well, there are worse ways to be alive. Firelight is the comfort everyone wants and the danger everyone respects. Outside the wagon, somewhere in the white, there may be a low bed of coals, half buried behind a windbreak of boxes, brush, snow, or another wagon. Or there may be no fire at all now, only the memory of one clinging to your coat. In a house, fire is the centre of the room, on the plains in a blizzard. Fire becomes a negotiation with wind, fuel, smoke, and fear. Very cosy, naturally. In the same way a leaking boot is technically a container. You remember the last attempt to tend it. Someone crouched with their back to the gale, shoulders hunched, hat pulled low, hands working near the ground where the wind was less violent. The flame struggled under a pot blackened by many meals. Snow fell into it. Smoke blew sideways. Sparks lifted too quickly and vanished. A few dry chips, bits of grass, twists of paper, and precious kindling were coaxed into heat. Every scrap mattered. Fire on the open prairie was not always impossible, but it was rarely casual. One solid piece of background here is that travellers on the treeless stretches of the Great Plains often struggled to find wood. They used what the land offered, willow or cottonwood near streams. Roots, brush, dried grass, and famously dried buffalo dung, often called buffalo chips. These chips burned with a steady heat when dry, and many emigrants relied on them where timber was scarce. It is not the fuel of fairy tales, perhaps, unless your fairy tale has excellent agricultural realism, but they cook supper and warmed hands, respect the chip, in this storm. Though, even buffalo chips are difficult. They may be buried, they may be damp. The wind may shred the flame before it catches. If your party gathered fuel earlier, it is kept under cover if possible. Guarded as carefully as flour, a small bundle of sticks can feel like treasure. A sack of dry chips can look almost luxurious. Fire needs preparation, and a blizzard punishes anyone who assumed the evening would be reasonable. You lie inside the wagon and imagine the fire outside shrinking. Its light once painted the canvas from below, a faint amber pulse along the lower edge. Now the world beyond the flap is mostly dark. With snowlight instead of flame, the loss is not only physical. Fire gathers people. It makes a camp feel intentional without it. Everyone retreats inward, and the wagon becomes a small, crowded cave of breath and cloth. There is a reason the fire is kept outside. A covered wagon full of canvas, bedding, clothing, rope, straw, dry goods. And nervous people is not a place for open flame. Lanterns are used carefully. Candles are shielded. Coals brought too near can spill. A spark can catch a blanket or canvas edge. In strong wind, even opening the flap can change how a flame behaves. The idea of warmth inside the wagon is tempting. But the idea of setting your entire moving household alight is, shall we say, less relaxing. So you make do with traces. A covered lantern gives a little glow, perhaps set low and watched carefully, perhaps extinguished to save oil and reduce danger. If it remains lit, its light trembles across faces, sacks, and hanging cloth. It reveals frost on eyelashes. It shines on a tin cup and makes it look briefly important. Then the wick is turned down, because oil must last, and because darkness is safer than carelessness. A lesser-known custom from cold camps was to bank coals beneath ash or cover them in a controlled way so a fire might be revived later, without starting from nothing. People had long practiced such fire-keeping in homes and camps, coaxing embers through the night like tiny sleeping animals, on the prairie, if wind and snow allowed. Preserving coals could save precious effort in the morning. The trick was keeping them alive without letting them wander. Fire, like some relatives, is helpful only when firmly managed. Experts who study trail diaries still puzzle over how much discomfort came from fuel scarcity compared with exposure itself. Many first-hand notes simply say there was no wood, very cold, or storm continued, leaving later readers to imagine the full bodily experience behind those plain words. A sentence can be short because the writer was calm, or because their fingers were too stiff for literary flourishes. Either way, when the fire fails, the night becomes longer. Inside, the absence of heat changes posture. People curl smaller. Blankets are tucked more tightly. Feet withdraw from the outer edges. No one casually sits upright for conversation, because any movement lets warm air escape. Even complaints become quieter. You can hear the little economy of warmth in the way everyone breathes under the covers. A person coughs, then pulls the blanket back quickly. Another rubs hands together beneath a coat. Someone whispers that the fire may be gone. Someone else says it can be rebuilt at daylight, which is true in the same way we can discuss taxes later is true. Comforting, but not immediately useful. The memory of supper smoke remains in the wagon. It clings to wool and hair. It mixes with the animal smell drifting from outside and the cold damp of canvas overhead. Smoke is unpleasant when it stings the eyes, but now its smell becomes a reminder that flame existed. It says there was heat here once. It says there may be heat again. Human beings are sentimental about combustion for excellent reasons. Beyond the wagon, the snow may be burying the fire pit completely. A drift grows where the wind slows behind a wheel. Ash darkens the snow in a small patch, then disappears under fresh white. If coals remain, they glow unseen. guarded under grey powder. If they die, morning will begin with stiff fingers, reluctant fuel, and the careful scraping together of anything dry enough to burn. This is not the cheerful campfire scene painted on the side of modern mugs. This is energy management under pressure, with weather acting as an unpaid supervisor. A child asks if there will be coffee in the morning. The question is practical and profound. Coffee means water heated, fuel found, a pot set safely. Adults functioning at a level above tragic furniture. Coffee has become a symbol of civilization in a tin cup. The answer comes softly if we can make a fire. The child accepts this, perhaps not understanding how large that if has become. You think of the animals outside, their heat locked inside their own bodies. You think of the children tucked deep within the blankets. You think of the elders whose joints ache harder without warmth. Fire would help all of this, yet fire also demands labour, risk, and materials you may not have, so the wagon turns inward again, relying on layers, closeness, and patience. The wind snaps the canvas hard enough to make the hanging lantern sway. Someone reaches up and steadies it, then decides the little flame is not worth the worry. The wick is lowered until the wagon dims. Shadows thicken, the faces vanish, the storm remains. In the dark, you understand why firelight matters even when it gives little heat. It organizes fear. It gives the eye somewhere to rest. Without it, the mind wanders to all the white emptiness beyond the canvas. But darkness also has mercy. It hides the cramped arrangement, the frost, the worried expressions, the snow forcing its way into seams. It asks you to feel instead of look. The blanket edge under your chin, the warm child breathing near your sleeve, the rough wool against your palms, the boards beneath the bedding. The fire is small, distant, or gone, still. The night continues. You do not need a blazing hearth to pass through it, though you would certainly write a flattering review if one appeared. You need the careful conservation of what warmth remains. You need not to panic. You need the storm to spend itself before your people do. And so, without much fire, you settle deeper into the human heat of the Wagon, while outside, under ash or snow or darkness, the idea of flame waits for morning. Supper becomes part of sleeping before anyone says the word sleep. You feel it in the way hands reach for food while still thinking about blankets, in the way the adults measure portions with their eyes, in the way the children watch the pot as if it might tell them the future. Food is not only comfort tonight, food is warmth waiting to be released inside the body. It is courage with steam rising from it. It is the small edible argument that morning is worth planning for. The meal has to be simple because the storm has made everything difficult. The fire outside is weak or nearly gone. Fuel is scarce. Water is cold enough to make fingers ache. Provisions are packed under bedding. Tools, sacks, or the unfortunate person who just found a tolerable position and now must move because the beans are beneath their shoulder. The wagon is not a kitchen, but like most households under pressure, it becomes one anyway. Someone finds a sack, someone finds a knife, someone curses a frozen knot very softly, because even in hardship there is etiquette. A plain, dependable truth of trail life is that emigrant food supply is often centered on durable staples: flour, cornmeal, bacon or salt pork, beans, dried fruit, coffee, sugar, and sometimes rice, hard bread or preserved vegetables. Fresh food was prized but unreliable. Milk depended on whether a cow travelled with the party and whether she was still giving milk. Meat depended on hunting, trade, or what had been packed. In a blizzard, the food that matters is what can be reached, cooked quickly and shared without waste. You may have eaten earlier, before the storm worsened, but cold burns through the body's reserves. Now someone decides there must be one more warm swallow if possible. Not a feast, not even a respectable supper by cheerful standards. Perhaps cornmeal mush, Perhaps beans reheated till they soften just enough. Perhaps bacon fried in a small pan. It's fat saved carefully because fat is energy and flavour and morale. Perhaps coffee so thin it barely deserves the name. Though nobody says that aloud because coffee has feelings. The smell rises and changes the wagon. Even a little heat releases memory. Cornmeal smells earthy and mild. Bacon smells like civilization has returned with a greasy hat. Coffee smells bitter, dark and adult. Dried apples, if simmered, give off a sweet scent that seems almost luxurious. A little orchard ghost drifting through damp canvas and wool. Your stomach tightens. Hunger does not need to be dramatic to command attention. It can simply sit under your ribs and tap politely until you obey. An odd note from frontier food habits is that some travellers roasted grains, peas, or even scraps of bread to stretch or imitate coffee when real coffee ran low. Chicory and other substitutes were known in different settings too. The result might be warming, bitter, and socially acceptable if everyone agreed to be generous with the definition of coffee on a freezing night. A hot cup of almost coffee is still better than a cold cup of perfect nothing. The children are fed first, at least with the warmest spoonfuls. A small tin cup passes from hand to hand. The oldest sleeper is urged to take more. Someone says they are not hungry, which may mean they are tired, worried, nauseated from cold, or practicing self-denial in that deeply inconvenient adult way. Another person insists. Food is pressed into their hand. The argument is gentle, because the storm has taken enough energy already. You hold a cup between both palms. The metal is hot at first, then quickly cools in the cold air. Steam brushes your face and leaves dampness near your nose. You sip carefully. The liquid is not elegant. It may taste of smoke, old tin, and the bottom of yesterday's pot. It may have a few floating bits that modern dining would describe as unacceptable and a frontier stomach would describe as texture. Still, warmth enters your mouth, throat, and chest. It spreads slowly, not like fire, more like permission. Those who study overland accounts continue to disagree about how much morale depended on hot meals rather than calories alone. Lists of provisions tell us what people carried, but they do not fully explain what a warm supper did for fear. A cold biscuit may sustain life. A hot drink tells the mind that someone is still caring for the order of things. The difference is quiet but powerful. Warm food makes the wagon feel less like a trapped box and more like a household enduring weather with poor manners. The meal also has to prepare the body for stillness. You cannot sleep well when hunger keeps you alert. You also cannot sleep well if you drink too much and must crawl out into the blizzard later. An adventure no sensible person seeks, so you take enough, not too much. Food is rationed not only by scarcity but by nighttime practicality. Every need becomes more complicated after the bedding is sealed and the cold has settled into the boards. Frozen provisions make their own little comedy. A chunk of salt pork can be stiff as wood. Butter, if you have any, is a pale rock. Dried fruit must be chewed patiently unless softened. Molasses, if carried, can thicken in the cold until it pours with the enthusiasm of a sleepy turtle. Flour must be kept dry at all costs. A spill now would be heartbreaking, and also make the floor gritty in places where your cheek may later land. History is full of grand tragedies, yes, but also the quiet horror of flour embedding. Someone shakes snow from a kettle or melts a little clean snow for water. If other water is frozen or limited, snow makes less water than it looks like it should, which feels unfair. A pot full of fluffy snow collapses into a disappointing puddle, as if winter is charging hidden fees. Still, melted snow can serve when necessary, though it needs fuel and time, both precious. If you have water in a barrel or keg, it may be icy around the edges, requiring a knife or spoon to break through. Every drink has labour inside it. After eating, the wagon grows drowsier. Not relaxed, exactly, but softened. The children's complaints fade. Adults stop moving supplies unless required. The smell of food lingers in blankets and hair. A few crumbs are brushed carefully into a hand, not left for mice or waste. Cups are wiped, nested, or tucked somewhere they will not roll. The pot is placed securely. Grease is saved if there is grease to save. Nobody casually discards anything useful. The storm has made every object more valuable. You feel the warmth from the food settle under your ribs. Outside, the fire may be dying, but inside your body a small heat continues. It is not enough to conquer the cold. Nothing tonight conquers the cold. The best you can do is persuade it to wait at the edges. Your stomach is no longer hollow. Your hands have stopped shaking so sharply. Your mind, fed by warmth, begins to loosen its grip on every danger at once. A final bite of dried apple passes to the child who asked for it. The piece is leathery, sweet, and treasured. The child chews slowly, eyes half closed, then curls back into the blankets. You remember the smell of apples by your shoulder earlier, that little stored summer hidden in a sack. Now it becomes part of the night's comfort, small but real. The cup is taken from your hands, the bedding closes again. The cargo shifts back into its sleeping arrangement. Somewhere beyond the canvas, the animals breathe above you. Frost gathers where supper, steam, joins human breath. The wagon smells of smoke, wool, bacon, damp cloth, and warm grain. It is not pleasant in any polished way, but it is deeply alive. You lie down with food inside you and cold outside you, and the difference matters. Supper has not made the wagon safe. It has made it bearable. It has given your body something to burn while the storm presses its white weight against the world. As the last cup is tucked away and the blankets are drawn close, the night grows quieter, fuller, and slightly less impossible. Clothing becomes a mattress because the wagon floor has no mercy. You discover this slowly, one shoulder blade at a time. The boards beneath the bedding do not soften just because the night is historic. A plank remains a plank. A knot in the wood remains a small, round insult. A crate corner under the quilt remains deeply committed to meeting your ribs, so the spare garments come out. Not for dressing, but for padding, sealing, wrapping, stuffing, and persuading your body that sleep is still a reasonable ambition. A coat is folded twice and pushed beneath your hip. A shawl is rolled under someone's neck. Spare stockings are tucked into a gap near the tailgate where the wind keeps finding its way in like an unwelcome salesman. Mittens become padding over a sharp box hinge. A child's extra dress is folded beneath cold feet. A man's spare shirt, stiff from damp and travel, is shaken loose and laid where the floorboards bite hardest. Nothing is only what it was made to be. Tonight, every object must apply for a second job. In the middle of the 19th century, ordinary clothing was often made from wool, linen, cotton, leather, or blends depending on region. Cost and use. Ready-made clothing existed and grew more common, but many families still repaired, altered, reused, and layered garments with serious care. On a wagon journey, clothing was not endlessly replaceable. A coat represented money, labour, memory, and protection. Turning it into bedding meant trusting that it could still serve tomorrow, even after a night absorbing damp breath, dust, and the full personality of a wooden floor. You feel the value of wool most clearly. It scratches, it smells, it collects burrs and smoke and evidence, but it keeps warmth better than thin cotton when the air turns brutal. A wool coat folded beneath you traps a little air. A wool shawl around the head cuts the draft at the neck. Wool stockings, doubled if possible, create a small private climate around the feet. You may not love the itch. You may, however, choose the itch over numb toes because you're not completely unreasonable. Shoes and boots cause their own debate. Leave them on, and they help protect the feet if you must rise suddenly. Leave them on too long and damp leather can chill the toes. Stiffen and make the bedding filthy. Remove them, and you may warm your feet better under blankets, but you risk needing to fumble into frozen boots in darkness. There is no perfect choice, only a series of bad choices wearing different hats. Some keep boots close, wrapped in cloth to slow freezing. Others loosen them but do not fully remove them. You do what the cold, the damp, and common sense allow. A small curiosity from winter clothing practices is the use of newspaper, straw, or rags inside boots or around the body for extra insulation when proper materials ran short. Paper traps air, straw traps air, rags trap air. The principle is humble and effective, though crinkly. Imagine in a wagon during a blizzard, packed with family, flour and livestock smells, while your boots quietly rustle with yesterday's news, very elegant, very survival. The garments used as padding carry stories. A shawl may have been worn at a farewell weeks or months ago, when relatives waved from a familiar road and everyone pretended the parting was not too frightening. A child's cloak may be too short now, proof that the journey has lasted long enough for a body to change. A patch sleeve may show where sparks from an earlier fire burned a tiny hole. A bonnet ribbon may still hold the smell of soap from a town already far behind you. When clothing becomes bedding, memory lies directly under the skin. Specialists examining emigrant diaries and material culture do not always agree on how much travellers sacrificed comfort to preserve possessions, or sacrificed possessions to gain comfort. Some accounts describe treasured goods abandoned along trails when animals weakened or wagons grew too heavy. Other belongings were kept with almost stubborn devotion. Tonight, the question is intimate. Do you use the good quilt near the damp canvas? Do you place a decent coat under muddy feet? Do you risk a shawl in the draft because the child needs warmth? Survival is practical, but it is never purely practical. Objects matter because people have loved them. You press your palm beneath the bedding and feel the difference where clothing has been laid. Not soft, exactly. Softer. That is enough. A coat beneath your shoulder stops the board from cutting so sharply. A folded apron lifts your head a little. A bundle of shirts fills a hollow that was letting cold air pool against your back. The bed becomes uneven, but uneven in your favour. You begin to understand that a mattress is simply an argument between the body and the ground. Tonight, your argument is made of laundry. The layers of clothing also help create boundaries inside the cramped wagon. A rolled coat marks where a child's sleeping space begins. A shawl hung from a cord blocks a little draught and gives the illusion of privacy. A spare skirt tucked along the sideboard softens the wall. A pair of mittens laid near the lantern tells the half-awake watcher where to find them quickly. Clothing becomes architecture. It is a wall. Pillow, curtain, cushion, seal, signal, and occasionally, when nothing else is available, a towel. The damp is your constant enemy. Breath condenses, snow sneaks in, mittens are wet from earlier chores, stockings hold the chill from boots. Every garment must be judged. Dry clothing goes near bodies. Damp clothing is kept away if possible, or placed where it can do the least harm. Wet wool may still insulate somewhat, but wet cotton is a cold little betrayal. You learn to feel fabric in the dark, dry, clammy, frozen at the edge, warm from a body, safe enough, not safe enough. Someone tries to shake ice from a coat, and the tiny crystals scatter across the bedding. A child giggles once, because it looks briefly magical. An adult sighs because magic is now in the blanket. The crystals are brushed away. The coat is folded. The child is told to settle. The storm approves none of this and continues loudly. You lie back again, and the bedding accepts you in stages. First, the hard places announce themselves. Then your body shifts around them. Then the clothing layers warm beneath you. The coat under your hip stops feeling like a coat and becomes terrain. The shawl under your neck becomes a low hill. The stockings at the draft gap become a defensive earthwork against winter. This is how people sleep when comfort must be manufactured from whatever they carried. The smells are stronger close to the fabric. Wool oil, smoke, leather, soap nearly gone, damp hems, human skin. A trace of supper, a trace of animal. Modern life often hides such smells, but here they are, part of knowing what surrounds you. The clothing smells of the people who need it. It smells of work already done and warmth being saved for later. Your cheek rests on a folded sleeve, the seam leaves a line on your skin, and a button presses gently near your jaw. It is not comfortable, but it is familiar. A real mattress would be better, obviously. A feather bed in a quiet room would be divine, but this sleeve has crossed the same miles you have. It has known sun, dust, sweat, rain, and now snow. It does not solve the blizzard. It simply helps you endure another hour of it, around you. The others settle into their clothing-made bed. The wagon floor is still cold, the boards are still hard, the draft still tests every edge. Yet the garments soften the night just enough for tired bodies to loosen. Coats become cushions, shawls become walls, stockings become plugs against the wind. The whole cramped bed is patched together from necessity, memory, and cloth. And beneath those improvised layers, sleep comes a little closer, wrapped in everything you own. The storm sounds larger when you stop moving, while hands are busy with blankets, cups, coats, children, and the endless little repairs of cold life. The mind has tasks once the wagon settles, once supper warmth fades into the body and the clothing mattress holds you in its uneven grip. The wind becomes the main storyteller. It tells the same story again and again, which is rude, but also strangely hypnotic. You lie still and listen. The canvas does not make one sound. It has a whole vocabulary. A flat slap when a gust strikes broadside, a rattling flutter where a tie has loosened, a deep, stretching groan when the wooden bows strain, a dry hiss where snow streams along the roof, a heavy hush when a drift slides down and lands beside the wagon, then silence, but not true silence. Prairie silence in snow is thick, it feels padded, as if the world has been wrapped in white wool and set carefully out of reach. The Great Plains are famous for openness, and that openness changes how storms behave around you. With few trees, fences, houses, or hills to break the flow, wind can travel across long distances with terrifying freedom. Snow does not simply fall, it races, lifts, swirls, scours, and builds drifts in surprising places. In the 1850s, before telegraphs and organised weather warnings reached many travellers in useful ways, people often read the sky, the animals, the temperature, and their own experience. Sometimes those signs helped. Sometimes the storm arrived like a tax bill from the heavens, sudden, severe, and impossible to negotiate with. Darkness deepens the sound. You cannot see the horizon vanish, so you imagine it. You cannot see the snow crossing the prairie, so the hiss along the canvas becomes an entire white world in motion. Your ears try to measure distance, but the storm refuses to cooperate. A nearby sound seems far away. A far sound seems to scrape the wagon wall. A loose strap may sound like footsteps, a branch. If there is any brush nearby, may sound like a hand. The mind, tired and cold, becomes a very dramatic little playwright. Inside the wagon, the sleeping bodies form a softer rhythm beneath the storm. Breath, a shift, a sniffle, a child grinding teeth, someone swallowing, someone whispering without words. The animals outside add their low punctuation. A snort, a stamp, a chainring tapping against wood or iron. Between these sounds, you hear your own pulse in your ear pressed against the folded sleeve. It is strange how loud a body can be when the world outside is trying to erase everything. There was an old belief among some plains travellers and rural weather watchers that certain kinds of quiet before a storm, or a strange colour in the sky, meant hard weather coming. Others watched livestock closely, or noticed when birds vanished from the open air. Were these signs reliable sometimes? enough to be remembered, not enough to trust fully. Weather law survives because it is useful just often enough to become respectable, and wrong just often enough to get people into trouble. Tonight, if anyone had noticed an eerie stillness before the blizzard, they are probably not feeling smug about it. They are too busy being cold. The darkness around the wagon is almost complete. If the lantern has been lowered or put out, you see only vague grey where snowlight presses through the canvas. Faces become shapes. Hands appear only when they move close to you. The hanging blankets are darker patches against the pale roof. Frost glimmers faintly where breath has frozen, then disappears when your eyes shift. You do not know exactly where every object lies, but your body remembers the map cup wrapped in cloth, kettle secured near the side, boots close enough to find, child near your elbow, elder near the warmer centre. People who study emigrant writing often differ on how to interpret fear in these brief nighttime accounts. Many diaries from overland journeys use restrained language. Even when events were harsh, a writer might note that the wind blew terribly, or that no one slept, and then move on to the next day's miles. Does that restraint mean they were stoic, or simply too tired to describe dread in detail? As you lie in the wagon, you can feel how much goes unsaid. Fear does not always announce itself as panic. Sometimes it is the careful way no one mentions the trail being gone. Sometimes it is the extra hand checking the child's blanket. Sometimes it is the silence after an animal stamps. The snow changes the outside world by removing edges. Rocks, ruts, grass, barrels, wheel tracks, and discarded brush all blur into one pale surface. That matters even while you sleep, because your body knows that morning depends on finding things again. The road, the harness, the feed, the fire pit, the direction of travel, all hidden or distorted. The storm has not only made the night cold, it has made the future vague. You try to let the sound become soothing. The wind rises and falls like breath if breath were enormous and slightly hostile. The canvas drums in patterns that almost repeat. Snow taps, then rushes, then taps again. Your mind begins counting gusts instead of sheep, because sheep would have had the good sense to be in a barn somewhere. One gust, a pause, another, a long hiss. A thud of sliding snow, a child sighs. The robe shifts, your toes complain, then quiet. A little draught touches your cheek, and you pull the blanket higher. The wool edge brushes your lips. It tastes faintly of smoke and salt. You turn your face inward, toward the warmest part of the bedding, and the storm grows slightly muffled. Not gone, never gone, only farther away by the thickness of cloth and shared heat. Then something snaps outside. Everyone wakes halfway. Not fully, not with shouts, but with that instant animal stillness that happens before thought arrives. The sound could be a strap, a stick, a crust of ice breaking from the wheel, piece of frozen canvas edge. The watcher lifts a little. No second sound follows. The animals remain where they are, slowly. Breathing resumes. Someone murmurs, only the wind. The phrase is meant to soothe. It is also not entirely convincing, because the wind is the main problem, but language does what it can. You drift again. The hard floor fades under the layers of clothing. The wagon's small smells settle around you: wool, smoke, damp canvas, leather, old grain, cold metal, sleeping people. The darkness no longer feels empty. It has become inhabited by familiar sounds. The storm still rules outside, but inside you can name things. The child's breathing, the elder's cough, the ox's snort, the canvas tie, the sliding snow. Naming does not remove fear, but it gives fear less room to wander. Now and then the prairie offers a silence so deep it startles you awake. The wind drops for a few seconds, and the absence feels louder than the storm. In that pause, you hear snow settling on snow, tiny grains shifting like sand. You hear a board creak under someone's weight. You hear your own breath emerge from the blanket and vanish into cold air. Then the wind returns, and the canvas answers with a long shiver overhead. Sleep comes in fragments. A few minutes, a dream of walking through flour. A waking moment when you wonder whether the wagon has moved. Another dream in which the snapping canvas becomes laundry on a summer line. Then the blizzard pulls you back with a hard gust, and you remember the frozen plain, the buried wheels, the animals outside, and the narrow warmth you share. You do not defeat the storm sounds. You learn to rest beside them. You let the prairie darkness press around the wagon without entering completely. You listen until the frightening noises become known noises, and the known noises become part of the room, beneath the restless canvas, among cargo, clothing, breath, and borrowed heat. You float at the edge of sleep while snow writes over the world beyond the walls. Morning does not arrive all at once. It seeps into the wagon slowly, pale and weak, as if daylight itself is reluctant to come out in this weather. At first there is only a greyness in the canvas above you, a dull whitening where the dark has thinned. The storm still moves outside, but its voice has changed. The night roar has softened into a tired scraping sound, snow rubbing against snow, wind whirring at the wagon cover like it has misplaced something important. You wake because cold has found you again. It's not a dramatic waking, no trumpet, no sudden rescue, just the stiff realization that your shoulder aches. Your hip has become personally acquainted with a board, and your breath has made winter decorations above your face. Frost clings to the inside of the canvas in tiny feathers. Where the wagon cover sags, the crystals gather thicker, making the roof look almost pretty, which is rude of it, considering the circumstances. When someone shifts, a dusting of frozen breath falls and lands on blankets, hair and cheeks. You blink, and one bright speck melts near your eye. A familiar detail from cold weather travel is that enclosed shelters without proper ventilation often gathered moisture from breathing. Cooking steam, wet clothes, and crowded bodies. In a covered wagon, that moisture had nowhere elegant to go. It froze on canvas, wood, bedding edges, and sometimes on the hair or caps of sleepers near the walls. The wagon did protect you from the full violence of the blizzard, but it also collected the evidence of everyone breathing through the night. Congratulations, the ceiling has kept your receipts. You move one hand first. It feels thick and slow inside the mitten. The fingers bend reluctantly. The wool is damp at the edge. Perhaps from breath, perhaps from snow sneaking in, perhaps from that mysterious frontier category known as everything is a little wet. You flex your wrist under the blanket, then your toes. The toes answer after a delay, like distant relatives replying to a letter. They are cold, but present. Present is good. Around you, the others wake in pieces. A child turns over and complains before opening their eyes. An elder coughs, low and dry, then pulls the blanket closer. Someone whispers that it is morning, though the light barely supports the claim. Someone else asks whether the storm has stopped. No one answers immediately, because everyone is listening. The canvas still trembles. The animals still shift outside. Snow still scrapes along the wagon side. Stopped is too generous, weaker, perhaps, less furious, taking a breath. The blankets are stiff where dampness has frozen. You notice it at the edges first. A quilt corner that touched the sideboard has hardened into a cold crease. The robe is heavy and matted near the top where frost fell. A shawl stuffed into a draft gap has frozen to the shape of the opening, which is useful in a very depressing way. The bedding smells stronger in morning smoke, wool, sleep, cold sweat, damp hide, and the faint stale sweetness of yesterday's food. Night has cooked all those smells together without asking permission. A small bit of trail oddness appears in how people dealt with frozen bedding and clothing, if sunlight or fire allowed. Blankets were shaken, beaten, aired, or draped over wagon bows, bushes, wheels, or ropes to dry. In harsh weather, though, people sometimes had to keep using bedding that was never fully dry for days. A blanket could become a calendar of discomfort. Carrying one damp night into the next, you begin to understand how luxurious the word dry really is. Not warm, not soft, just dry. A word fit for poetry. Now comes the careful work of leaving the bed without destroying the warmth for everyone else. You cannot simply leap up and stretch like a person in a cheerful advertisement for mattresses. First, you untangle your foot from someone's coat. Then you move the sack that has trapped the blanket edge. Then you lift a child's arm and tuck it back under cover. Every motion releases a little heat. Cold air slips into the bedding like it has been waiting politely outside the door. The first person who rises becomes the scout of discomfort. They push aside the flap just enough to peer out, and daylight spills in, cold and blue. Snow is piled against the wagon step. The wheel spokes are crusted. The ground is missing under drifts. The air outside looks solid with blowing powder. The person draws the flap closed quickly, and everyone feels the cold that came in with the glimpse. It travels across faces and under blanket edges. The child complains again, this time. Honestly, the child has a point. Researchers who work with emigrant diaries still disagree about how to read morning-after descriptions of blizzards, especially when writers move quickly from suffering to practical tasks. A journal may say bedding frozen or all much chilled, and then spend more words on the animals, the fire, or the road. That does not mean the bodies were unimportant. It may mean bodies were too obvious to explain when every joint aches, when fingers fail at buttons, when blankets crackle at the edge. You do not need poetry to understand the morning. You sit up slowly. The wagon tilts in your perception before it steadies. Your back objects, your knees object, your neck, which spent the night curved against a folded coat, files a detailed complaint. The air touches the skin between scarf and collar, and you tuck your chin down again. Someone hands you a cup, empty for now, but the gesture promises the possibility of something hot later. Hope, this morning, has the shape of a tin cup. The children are checked first, faces, fingers, toes. The smallest one is still warm, though sleepy and cross. Another has damp stockings and must have them changed if dry ones can be found. Dry stockings are produced from a bundle guarded like treasure. The damp pair is not thrown aside. Nothing is thrown aside. They are wrung, shaken, perhaps tucked where body heat or future fire might help. Even misery is managed carefully. The elder is helped upright. Stiff legs unfold beneath blankets. A shawl is tightened. A cap is pulled lower. Someone rubs cold hands between their own. The movement is practical, but it carries the tenderness of the night into morning. You notice how quiet everyone is. Not hopeless, just conserving words until the day proves what it intends to be. The wagon must be restored from bedroom to working shelter. That means cups found, bedding lifted, cargo checked, food located, tools made reachable, and wet things separated from dry. But no one can do it quickly. The night has left its mark in every muscle. The storm made you small, curled, compressed. Morning asks you to become useful again, which seems ambitious. You look up once more at the frosted canvas. The tiny crystals catch the grey light. Delicate as lace. They are beautiful, yes, and made from your own breath, which is a little intimate for ceiling decor. A drop forms where warmth touches frost. It trembles, then falls onto a blanket. Someone mutters and brushes it away. Outside, an ox exhales. The sound is low and steady. Inside, the sleepers are no longer fully sleepers. They are becoming workers again. Caretakers, firemakers, animal checkers, snow diggers, breakfast coaxers, direction finders. The bed of cargo has done its duty badly but sufficiently. It carried you through the dark. You are cold. You are sore. Your blankets are stiff. Your hair smells of smoke and damp wool. But you have woken. The wagon still stands, the people around you still breathe, and in this hail, frozen morning, survival is not dramatic at all. It is the slow act of moving one numb hand, then another, and beginning again. The wagon is no longer simply standing on the prairie. By morning, it has been partly claimed by it. Snow gathers around the wheels, packs under the axle, climbs the lower boards, and smooths every hard shape into a soft white mound. The storm has not only visited, it has moved in, rearranged the furniture, hidden the doorway, and made itself comfortable like the worst guest in history. When the flap opens again, the first view outside is not a landscape but a blankness. The familiar ruts are gone. Yesterday's tracks have vanished under drifted snow. The faint line of travel that guided the wagon across the open ground has been rubbed out. Even nearby objects look uncertain. A barrel beside the wheel becomes a hump. A low bush becomes a white lump. A tool left leaning against the wagon has disappeared completely, which is unfortunate, because tools are not decorative. They are the difference between moving and staring helplessly at wood. You step down, or try to. The snow is higher than expected and crusted in places, loose in others. Your boot breaks through with a muffled crunch, sinking nearly to the calf. Cold pours in around the leather. The shock climbs your leg, very refreshing. If you are a polar bear with poor judgment, you grab the sideboard for balance, and your mitten slides against frost. The wagon looks larger from outside now, its canvas roof rounded with snow, its wheels half buried, its body pressed into a drift as if the prairie has decided to keep it. On the overland trails, direction depended on a mixture of visible tracks. Landmarks, rivers, guidebooks, memory, and the knowledge of experienced travellers or guides. In open country, a storm could erase many of those aids in a single night. Before reliable mapped roads, fences, and frequent settlements, losing the trail was not a small inconvenience. It could mean wandering toward poor water, missing a crossing, wasting animal strength, or moving in circles while food and patience dwindled together. The wheels are the first practical worry. Snow has drifted against them and frozen in ridges around the rims. The spokes are crusted. The hubs are packed. If the storm has blown wet snow followed by hard cold, the lower parts may be locked in place. You crouch with stiff knees and scrape at the packed mass using a shovel, a board, a pan, or whatever tool can be found. Metal bites snow better than wood, but metal is cold enough to sting through gloves. Each scoop feels heavier than it looks. Snow is light when it falls from heaven. On the ground, packed by wind, it becomes work. Someone checks beneath the wagon for the tongue. Chains, dropped gear, and any item shoved there before the storm, the space below, often useful for shade or storage in calmer weather, has become a low white cave. Reaching into it is unpleasant. Snow slides into sleeves. Fingers numb quickly. A lost hammer, pin, strap, or yoke part can delay everything. The wagon is a machine made of many humble pieces, and the prairie has hidden them as if playing a game no one requested. A curious little habit from wagon travel was the marking of camps or routes, with improvised signs when visibility or terrain made direction uncertain. Broken branches, piled stones, bits of cloth, wheel marks, or notches on trees where trees existed. On the open winter prairie, such signs could vanish beneath snow in minutes. A rag tied to a stick might remain visible if the stick stood tall enough. A line of footprints could disappear before the last person finished making it. The land did not preserve your intentions. It had its own filing system, mostly white. You look for the trail. Perhaps there is a slight depression where wagon ruts were. A faint dark seam where grass shows through. A curve of drift that suggests yesterday's track. Or perhaps every direction looks equally possible and equally wrong. The horizon, if visible at all, is flat and pale. Clouds hang low. Wind lifts loose snow in veils that move across the ground. hiding and revealing shapes without explanation. You realize how deeply travel depends on memory shared among people. Where did the sun set yesterday? Which way was the creek? Was the low rise to the north or west? Did the wind shift in the night? People who analyse emigrant records often differ over whether travellers lost in storms were usually defeated by lack of knowledge or by exhaustion after correct knowledge became impossible to use. It is one thing to know the right direction while seated at a table with a map. It is another to know it when your eyelashes are iced. Your animals are hungry, the children are cold, and every landmark has been rubbed smooth. The mind may remember, but the body has to carry that memory into the snow. The animals are part of the calculation. Even if the wagon can be dug free, can the team pull it? Oxen may stand patiently. But patience is not strength without feed and rest. Hooves break through crust, legs strain. Harness stiffens if the ground beneath the snow is uneven. The wheels may lurch into hidden ruts or holes. To move too soon risks breaking something. To wait too long risks losing daylight. Warmth and morale. The decision sits heavily in the cold air. Inside the wagon. Bedding is being shaken and folded, but not fully packed yet. Nobody wants to seal everything away until they know whether travel is possible. The bed of cargo from the night before remains half undone, as if sleep might be needed again at any moment. Children peer through the flap, bundled until only their eyes show. An elder asks whether the trail is found. Someone says, "Soon." It is a useful word, soon. It contains no promises that can be measured. Snow has buried the fireside too. The morning's work of warmth and the morning's work of movement compete for the same hands. Dig out the wheels, check the animals, find the road, recover fuel, melt water, feed children, dry bedding. There are too many tasks, and all of them seem to be wearing wet gloves. The wagon that served as a bedroom must become transport again. But first it must be excavated from the night. You brush snow from one wheel and see the wood beneath, dark and swollen looking where moisture has touched it. Iron tires, if fitted, hold the cold fiercely. Wooden spokes creak when tested. A small drift has formed behind the rear wheel, shaped by the wind into a smooth little bank. It is beautiful in the useless way dangerous things often are. You kick it apart, because beauty may admire itself elsewhere. Farther out, the prairie stretches blankly. Somewhere under that snow lies yesterday's path. Somewhere beyond the pale air is the next safe camp, grove, creek, settlement, or known stopping place. The storm has made the wagon feel isolated, but the lost trail reminds you that isolation is not only about distance. It is about not knowing how to continue, and yet people continue by doing small work first. Scrape the wheel, clear the tongue, tie a cloth where it can be seen, send one adult only a short distance, not far enough to vanish, to inspect the ground, compare memories, watch the animals, test the snow crust, check the sky for light and wind. The huge question of direction is broken into tasks a mittened hand can perform. You stand beside the half-buried wagon and feel the night still inside your bones. The sleeping space behind you is cramped, smoky, and frost-laced. But it is known. The prairie ahead is wide and blank. For a moment, the covered wagon seems less like a vehicle than a small stubborn argument against disappearance. Its wheels are buried, its trail erased, its people sore and cold, and still the work begins. One scoop of snow, one cleared spoke, one remembered landmark, one breath, visible in the pale air, drifting forward after midnight, and again in the grey hours after the storm. The work that keeps the wagon alive gathers most quietly around women's hands. Not always only women, not in every family, not by some tidy rule that history can place in a little labelled drawer, but in many emigrant households, the tasks of feeding, nursing, mending, soothing, rationing, arranging, and noticing fall heavily on mothers. Wives, daughters, sisters, aunts, and grandmothers. The blizzard may shake the canvas with all the drama of a bad theatre villain, but inside, survival depends on small emotions. You see it first in the blankets. A woman wakes before she's fully awake, because a child's breathing has changed. She does not sit up grandly. She reaches. Her hand finds the child's shoulder, then the blanket edge. Then the cold place where the cover has slipped. She tucks it back under the child's side without making a sound. The child never wakes. The woman does not receive applause, which is typical. Civilization has always had a suspicious habit of relying on invisible tucking. 19th century women on overland journeys often carried a double burden. They travelled the same exhausting miles as everyone else, while also preserving the routines of household life under almost impossible conditions. They cooked, washed, sewed, cared for children, tended the sick, guarded family possessions, and tried to maintain order in a place where dust, weather, hunger, and motion constantly undid their work. A wagon might roll westward, but domestic labour rolled with it, packed among the flour sacks and bedding. Inside the covered wagon, after the worst of the night has passed, there are stockings to assess, mittens to dry, shawls to shake, cups to wipe and damp edges to keep away from the warmest bodies. A woman feels a blanket and knows by touch whether it can stay near the children or must be moved. She smells sour milk if there is any, notices whether bacon grease has spilled, remembers where the sewing kit was tucked after the last repair. She knows there's difference between a child whining from discomfort and a child growing too quiet from cold. That kind of knowledge is rarely dramatic. It is also extremely difficult to replace. You watch as she draws a needle from a small case. Perhaps the case is wooden, tin, or cloth, wrapped tightly so the needles do not vanish into the wagon's chaos. A torn mitten edge must be caught before it opens wider. A blanket binding is loosened. A child's stocking has a hole at the heel, and a hole in the stocking tonight is basically a tiny doorway for winter to enter and make itself at home. The needle flashes once in the weak light. Her fingers are stiff, but she works anyway. There is a humble old habit that seems almost funny until you need it. Women often save scraps of fabric, worn-out garments, string, thread ends, buttons, and bits of ribbon because almost anything could become a patch. Tie, bandage, marker, doll, pouch, or repair. A scrap bag was not clutter. It was a small emergency department made of leftovers. Tonight, a piece cut from a ruined sleeve may help patch a mitten. A ribbon may tie a blanket roll. A rag may wrap around a hot cup. If the fire can be coaxed back, nothing is just a scrap when the nearest store is hidden beyond snow. Miles and optimism. The wagon's cramped interior turns each domestic task into a physical puzzle. To mend, she must sit where there is enough light. But the lantern must not be too bright or too dangerous. To feed a child, she must find food without scattering bedding. To nurse a baby, she must create warmth and modesty under layers of wool and shawl while the canvas shudders overhead. To comfort an elder, she must move gently around crates and sacks. There is no room for graceful efficiency. Efficiency crawls here, carefully, on cold knees. Those who study women's trail diaries often disagree about whether these writings reveal endurance, resignation, resistance, or a mixture of all three. Some entries are brisk and practical, listing bread made, children ill, roads poor, weather severe. Others open briefly into grief, irritation, loneliness, or wonder. You feel how both can be true. A person can resent the work and still do it beautifully. A person can love the children and still be tired of being touched by everyone's needs. A person can keep the household together while privately thinking the prairie is a spectacularly bad idea. You hear low murmurs near the centre of the wagon. A mother tells a child to sip slowly. A daughter helps find the dry stocking bundle. An older woman advises keeping the cap tied down. Someone remembers that the last bit of sugar should not be used yet. Someone else knows exactly which sack holds the dried apples because she packed it, repacked it, protected it from damp, and has mentally counted it for days. Food is not simply available, it is managed. The smell of work rises again with the morning damp wool being shaken. Cold metal cups handled, cloth warmed between palms. A little smoke stirred from old garments. The woman near you rubs a child's feet through dry stockings until colour returns. Her own fingers are probably cold too. She ignores that. Or seems to. You notice the small tightening around her mouth when she flexes them. Care is not painless just because it is loving. There is also emotional work. Though no one calls it that in 1856, someone must decide what tone the morning will have. If the adult voices become sharp, the children will fray. If the fear becomes visible, the elders may worry more. So the women use ordinary speech as a blanket too. We will have something warm soon. Keep your hands tucked. Mind the cup. There now. Simple sentences. Small sentences. Sentences that hold the wagon in place while the trail outside remains missing. This is not to say men do nothing or that roles never blur. Hard weather makes everyone useful if they are able. Men mend harness, dig wheels free, check animals, fetch fuel, and risk the outside cold. Older boys carry loads, girls haul, cook, soothe, and sew. People cross boundaries when survival demands it. But the unseen continuity of household care, the making of a livable world inside the wagon, often rests with women whose names later appear only in relation to husbands or fathers. If they appear at all, rather rude are the record. Honestly, a woman lifts the corner of a blanket to inspect dampness beneath it. Her face changes slightly. Not panic, calculation. Can it be dried by body heat? Must it be moved? Will the child complain? Is there a better layer? She adjusts the bedding, folds the wettest edge outward, places a coat between cloth and sideboard, and tucks the child again. The storm has made a problem. She has answered with fabric. You feel the rhythm of this labour around you. Soft as breath, patch, tuck, feed, wipe, count, warm, reassure, repeat. It is after midnight, and it is morning, and it is every hour that need refuses to sleep. The wagon survives not only because its wheels are dug out, or because animals endure, or because the canvas holds. It survives because someone notices the loose mitten before fingers chill, the damp blanket before it spreads, the frightened child before fear becomes crying, the empty cup before thirst becomes weakness, as the light grows slightly stronger through the frosted cover. The women's work blends back into the whole family's work, almost disappearing because it has succeeded. The children are wrapped, the elder is upright, the cups are found, the bedding is not dry, but it is managed. The wagon is still cramped, smoky, sour, cold, and deeply inconvenient, yet it feels held together, not by comfort, not by luck alone, by hands that move in the dark, making warmth out of scraps, order out of clutter, and courage out of ordinary care. The men outside the canvas move like shadows first, then like people, then like very cold people who are seriously reconsidering several life choices. They leave the shared warmth of the wagon because some work cannot be done from under blankets, no matter how sincere the desire. The storm may have weakened, but the prairie has not become friendly, it has merely lowered its voice. You watch the flap open and close around them, each time letting in a blade of pale air. A boot steps down into snow, a gloved hand grips the sideboard, a shoulder disappears into the blowing white. The wagon seems to inhale cold after them. Inside, the blankets are pulled tighter, but everyone listens, because outside chores are not separate from indoor sleep. If the animals fail, or if the harness breaks, if the wheels remain buried, the whole household remains trapped. Men on wagon journeys were often expected to handle draft animals, repair gear, manage heavy digging, hunt or scout when needed, and make decisions about travel conditions, though real families often blurred those duties when necessity demanded. In blizzards, that work became dangerous in a plain, exhausting way. It involved leaving shelter, losing heat quickly, and trusting that the white air would still allow a person to find their way back to the wagon. You do not need wolves or bandits to make the morning frightening. A man can be defeated by a frozen buckle and 20 yards of bad visibility, which is less dramatic but very efficient. The first task is usually the animals. The team must be checked before almost anything else, because oxen, horses, or mules are living engines with knees that cannot wait for human convenience. A man moves along the line, touching necks, shoulders, legs, ropes, yokes, collars, traces. He looks for injuries, loosened gear, ice where it should not be, snow packed dangerously around hooves. The animals blow steam over his sleeves, their bodies are warmer than the air, and for a moment he may lean close to that heat. Not romantically, just practically. Warmth is warmth, dignity can stand in the snow and wait. Harness is stiff. Leather that flexed yesterday may feel like frozen bark. Buckles resist fingers. Ropes are crusted. A knot tied in a hurry during the storm may now be a small frozen sculpture dedicated to human regret. He works at it with mittened hands, then perhaps removes a mitten for a moment. Because bare fingers can solve what clumsy wool cannot, the cold bites immediately. He fixes the knot faster than he wants to, then shoves the hand back into warmth, flexing it hard. This is the frontier version of touching a hot stove, except the stove is the entire atmosphere. A minor but telling practice from trail life was carrying spare parts for wagons and harness extra bolts, lynch pins, straps, rope, chain links, tools, grease, and bits of leather. These unglamorous objects could decide the fate of a day. A missing pin could halt a wagon, a broken trace could make a strong team useless. A loose wheel could become a disaster miles from help. So when a man checks gear after a blizzard, he is not fussing, he is reading the wagon's chances. The men dig next. Snow around wheels, snow against the tongue, snow packed beneath the wagon bed. Digging sounds dull in the morning air. Shovel bites, snow lifts, snow falls. Breath comes hard, the work warms the body briefly. Then sweat chills under clothing. A nasty little trick winter likes to play. Too much exertion can become its own danger. You can freeze while working hard if dampness gets into the layers. The body burns hot, then cools fast. And the wool and comes every drop of stairs. Those who examine overland accounts still differ on whether men's outside labour during storms was recorded more often because it was considered public and notable, while indoor labour was treated as ordinary household duty. The diary might remember that the men dug out wheels for 3 hours, but not mention who kept children warm during those same hours. Both forms of work were necessary. One happened in the visible theatre of snow, the other happened inside the crowded. Breathing dark, history, being history, often preferred the shovel. You hear a call from outside, muffled by canvas. Then another voice answers from farther away. The sound makes everyone inside pause. Distance behaves strangely in snow. A shout may seem close when it is far, or vanish almost completely. The men must stay within known range of the wagons, especially if the storm still blows. A person walking to inspect the route might tie a rope back to the wagon in extreme conditions, or keep another person in sight, or move only as far as a visible marker. Whether your party uses such care depends on experience, caution, and how badly pride has frozen overnight. The outside work includes guarding what remains, not guarding from melodramatic villains, although travellers did worry about theft at times, but guarding from loss, a blanket blown loose, a shovel buried, a feed sack torn, a tin cup kicked into a drift. A small thing lost now may cost dearly later. Men move around the wagon, finding, securing, tying down, lifting, leaning objects where they can be seen. They brush snow from the canvas, tap the bows, inspect ropes. If the cover sags too much under weight, it may strain or tear. The roof that kept you alive at night needs care in the morning, like every other tired member of the party. There is a strange tenderness in the way a man touches the wagon wheel. He scrapes packed snow from the hub, tests the spokes, checks the tyre, and perhaps pats the wood once without thinking. The wagon is an object. Yes, but after enough miles, objects become companions of a kind. It has carried flour, bedding, tools, children, illness, hope, and yesterday's bad mood. It has creaked over ruts and through creek beds. Now it sits half buried, stubborn as a mule and only slightly more cooperative. Inside, you can smell cold air each time the flap opens. It is sharp and clean, cutting through the heavy interior blend of wool, smoke, sleep, food, and damp canvas. A man steps in briefly, bringing snow on his boots and shoulders. His face is red where the wind has struck it. Ice clings to his beard or scarf. He reports on the animals, the wheel, the depth of the drifts. The words are practical, but everyone listens for tone. If his voice is steady, the wagon relaxes a little. If he hesitates, even the children feel it. He reaches for something rope, a tool, spare leather, perhaps a cup. His hands shake slightly from cold, though he may pretend they do not. Someone passes him warm liquid if there is any. Someone tells him to change his mittens if the pair is soaked. He grunts, because gratitude sometimes wears a very small vocabulary. Then he goes back out. The work beyond the canvas interrupts rest again and again, just when the bedding warms, the flap opens, just when a child settles. A voice calls for a strap, just when your own eyes close. A shovel thuds against the wagon side. Sleep after a blizzard is not a finished thing. It is broken into pieces by duty. The night watch has become morning labour, and the body, still aching from the boards, must answer. Yet the men outside are also making future sleep possible. If the wagon can be freed, if the animals can be fed, if the trail can be found or a safer camp chosen, then tonight's shelter may be better, or at least different, which is sometimes the best history can offer. They dig not only to move, but to prevent the next night from being worse. You listen as the shoveling continues, steady now, almost rhythmic, scrape, lift, toss, scrape, lift, toss. The sound becomes part of the morning, like the canvas shiver was part of the night. Beyond the wagon, shapes are emerging from snow wheel, tongue, yoke, fire pit, path between animals and shelter. The men return the buried world to visibility one stubborn piece at a time. While inside the wagon, blankets are folded, children fed, and the fragile household prepares to become a travelling one again. Hope has to be kept warm too. It is not enough for the blankets to hold body heat, or for the animals to keep standing, or for the men outside the canvas to scrape snow from wheels until their shoulders ache. Something inside the wagon must also be protected from freezing. You feel it in the small pauses between tasks, when everyone looks briefly towards the covered sky and wonders what the day will allow. You feel it when a child asks whether the road is still there. You feel it when no one answers too quickly. Faith enters quietly, because loud faith would waste breath. Someone murmurs a prayer over a tin cup before handing it to an elder. Someone touches a small Bible or prayer book wrapped in cloth among the family things. Someone repeats a verse learned long ago in a warmer room, far from this white plain and its extremely aggressive decorating choices. The words may be formal, or they may be as plain as Lord keep us. Either way, they make a little shelter inside the larger one. Religious belief was deeply woven into many 19th century emigrant households, though not everyone believed in the same way or spoke of it with equal openness. Protestant hymns, family prayers, Bible reading, providential language, and references to God's protection appear throughout many diaries and letters from overland travel. Faith could explain danger, strengthen endurance, and give meaning to suffering that might otherwise feel random. In a blizzard, that mattered. Randomness is a cold companion. Meaning, even difficult meaning, gives the mind somewhere to sit. You listen as a woman hums under her breath. The tune is slow, almost too faint to separate from the wind. It may be a hymn, it may be a lullaby. The two often borrow from each other when people are tired enough. A child recognizes the melody and settles. The elder closes their eyes. The sound is not entertainment. It is a thread connecting this cramped wagon to church benches, kitchen hearths, bedsides, funerals, weddings, and evenings when weather stayed sensibly outside the walls. The tune says you have not become only travellers. You are still people with memory. But hope in a wagon is not only religious, it is also practical. Almost stubbornly so. A person counts the food and says there is enough for another day. Someone notes that the wind has shifted and maybe the storm is weakening. Another says the animals are cold but standing. A watcher sees a pale patch in the clouds and treats it like a personal letter from heaven. Hope often comes disguised as inventory. Flour left, coffee left, dry stockings left, 2 good ropes, 1 working shovel, 3 children warm enough to complain. Excellent signs, all things considered. Then come the small superstitions, the folk sayings, the weather notions, the habits nobody fully admits to believing, until they do them anyway. A red sky at morning, a ring around the moon, animals lying down, smoke bending low, an ache in old bones, a sudden hush in the air. People carried such ideas across oceans, mountains, farms, and generations. Some were based on keen observation. Some were charming nonsense with boots on. Many lived in the comfortable middle, where experience and imagination share a blanket. One unusual belief found in various rural communities was that certain aches, especially in joints or old injuries, could foretell changes in weather. Modern science gives some cautious room to the idea that pressure and humidity changes may affect pain for some people, though it does not turn every sore knee into a certified meteorological instrument. Still, if the elder in your wagon says their knee knew this storm was coming, no one is likely to argue today. The knee has earned respect, and frankly, it had a better forecast than anyone else. Others watch the animals. If the oxen stand calm, perhaps the worst has passed. If they grow restless, perhaps more weather is coming. If birds return to the air, perhaps the sky is clearing. If the wind smells different, perhaps it is shifting. You breathe through your scarf and try to smell anything beyond wool, smoke, damp canvas, and the lingering ghost of bacon. The prairie offers no simple answer. It rarely does. It prefers essays. People who interpret emigrant accounts still wrestle with how to separate faith, folklore, practical judgment, and later, memory in descriptions of survival. When a writer says Providence spared them, is that a spiritual claim, a narrative habit, a sincere emotional truth, or all three at once? When a family remembers that the animals knew the storm would break, are they recording observation or comfort after the fact from inside the wagon? The categories feel less important. You need prayer, weather sense, memory, and luck. You're not in a position to be picky. A child asks whether the storm is angry. The question makes the adults pause. It is a child's way of giving the blizzard a face. Because faceless danger is hard to hold in the mind. Someone answers gently that storms are not angry, they are only storms. Another person mutters that this one certainly has opinions. The child accepts both statements. Because children understand layered truth better than philosophers sometimes do. The storm is not angry, it is also behaving very rudely. There may be charms among the belongings, though no one names them grandly. A keepsake locket, a lock of hair folded in paper, a coin carried for luck, a ribbon from home, a little carved object tucked into a chest. These items do not dig snow or warm feet, but they hold attention. Touching them can steady a hand. Looking at them can remind a person that life extends beyond this single frightening morning. People do not survive on symbols alone, but symbols can help them remember why they are trying. You notice how hope moves from person to person. It does not remain with the cheerful. It travels, The man coming in from outside says the wheel can be cleared. That helps the woman warming a child's stockings. She says there is still meal enough for mush. That helps the elder. The elder says the wind sounds lower. That helps the child. The child, now braver, asks if the oxen will be hungry. Everyone almost laughs because yes, absolutely, the oxen will be hungry, and so will everyone else. And hunger is annoying but ordinary. Ordinary is a relief. Faith, too, can be communal without becoming formal. A few words spoken softly, a hand resting on another hand, a hymn line remembered, then lost, a blessing over food, a promise that morning has come, however pale and cold, in the wagon. Belief is not always a grand certainty. Sometimes it is a decision not to let fear become the only voice in the room. Outside, the men keep working. Inside, the bedding is gathered, shaken, folded, rearranged. The children are told where to put their hands, where not to step, which cup to hold, which bundle to avoid. The wagon begins to look less like a nest and more like a vehicle again. That transformation itself creates hope. A bed is for enduring, a wagon is for going on. The storm has not ended fully. Snow still lifts in low white ribbons across the ground. The trail remains uncertain. The fire is not yet strong. The animals must be fed. Nothing is solved in a satisfying storybook way. But the mood has shifted by a hair's breadth. Enough light has entered to make superstition search the sky. Enough warmth has returned to make prayer sound possible. Enough work has succeeded to make despair seem premature, and despair, like wet cotton, is best kept out of the bedding. You tuck a small charm, memory, or whispered line back into its place. You do not know whether it protects you. You know only that touching it made your breathing slow. That is not nothing. Around you. Hope survives in scraps a hymn, a knee's prediction, an animal's steady breath, a dry stocking, a spoonful of meal, a pale seam of sky. The blizzard has narrowed the world to canvas and snow, but inside that narrowness, human beings keep making meaning, which is one of their strangest and most durable habits. The storm loosens so gradually that at first you do not trust it. The wind still moves, but it no longer throws itself against the wagon with the same wild confidence. The canvas trembles instead of thrashing. Snow still skims across the ground, yet it seems lower now, tired, more interested in drifting than attacking. The prairie is not kind. Exactly. Kindness would be sunshine, dry socks, and breakfast that did not require excavation. But the weather has begun to spend itself, and everyone inside the wagon feels the change before anyone says it aloud. You hear it in the pauses. There are longer spaces between gusts. The animals outside stamp less often. The wagon boughs no longer complain with every breath of wind. Somewhere beyond the canvas, a man's voice carries more clearly than it did an hour ago. Another answers. The sound does not vanish instantly into the storm. It travels, muffled but present, and that alone makes the world feel larger again. During the worst of the blizzard, the wagon was nearly all that existed. Now the camp begins to return animals, wheels, tools, people moving around the sides, the buried fire pit, the direction where the trail might be found. Light strengthens through the canvas, not golden yet, not warm, just a steadier grey. Bright enough to reveal the frost lace overhead and the faces tucked beneath blankets. A child notices first. Children often spot returning possibility before adults admit it. It is lighter, the child says. No one wants to be foolishly hopeful, but several eyes lift. The cover glows where snow has thinned. A shape passes outside, a shadow of a person moving past the wagon wall. And for the first time since night closed in, the canvas feels less like the edge of the universe. Blizzards on the plains could immobilize travellers for hours or days, especially when wind drove snow into deep drifts around wagons. Animals and camps. The 1856 winter was remembered in parts of the Central Plains for severe cold and hardship. And storms like this revealed a simple truth of overland travel progress depended not only on courage but on waiting. You could have the best wagon, a strong team, and a heroic supply of stubbornness. But if the weather said no, the answer was no. People did not cross the plains by conquering nature every morning. Sometimes they survived by becoming very quiet until nature stopped shouting. Inside, the bed of cargo begins its final transformation. Blankets are lifted, shaken carefully, and folded only if dry enough. The buffalo robe is dragged back from the center, its weight awkward in the cramped space. Coats used as pillows are returned to shoulders, though now they are wrinkled, flattened, and perhaps carrying a little impression of someone's ear. Spare stockings are counted. Wet ones are separated. A shawl that spent the night blocking a draft is peeled from the sideboard and found to be stiff along one edge. Someone laughs softly at the shape it holds, like a frozen flag of domestic resistance. A small domestic oddity shows itself here when bedding or clothing froze into shapes overnight. Travellers sometimes used body warmth, careful rubbing, or brief exposure near a revived fire to soften the fabric before folding it. Force could tear stiff cloth or crack leather, so even in urgency, hands had to be patient. You do not yank winter out of a blanket, you persuade it, slowly, with breath, heat, and muttered comments about what you will do when you finally reach a proper house. The fire is coaxed back if any coals remain. If not, it must be remade from guarded fuel, dry scraps, and determination. A thin smoke rises beyond the flap. Then a stronger scent follows. Sharp and beautiful real smoke, living smoke. Smoke that means heat may return. It drifts into the wagon and mixes with the smell of damp wool and cold bodies. Someone says the coals were not entirely gone. This becomes excellent news. Almost festive, not birthday festive, more like we may thaw the kettle festive, which on this morning feels entirely sufficient. The children begin to behave like children again, which is both reassuring and slightly inconvenient. They ask questions. They want to look outside. They complain about hunger. One tries to stand too quickly and steps on a folded coat that someone needed. Another wants to know whether the snow is taller than the ox. An adult says no, probably not, and then seems to consider whether probably is safe. The fact that children have enough energy to ask unnecessary questions is a sign of recovery. Annoyance, in this case, is a health report. Outside, the wheels appear by degrees as snow is cleared away. The men and older children work with shovels, boards, pans, and boots. Buried shapes of the wagon return to themselves. Spoke, hub, rim, tongue, chain, yoke, revealed peace makes travel imaginable again, even if not immediate. The prairie is still difficult, but it is no longer completely unreadable. Shadows gather in depressions. A faint line suggests the old track. Farther off, perhaps a dark smudge marks brush. A creek line, or another wagon. The world has edges again. Those who interpret accounts of storms on the emigrant trails still disagree over how people judge the moment to move after severe weather. Some likely waited for visibility and animal strength. Others pushed ahead too soon from anxiety, dwindling supplies, or fear of being overtaken by worse conditions. The decision was never abstract. It happened with hungry children nearby, teams needing feed, bedding wet, daylight limited, and a road hidden under snow in that situation. Caution and urgency could sound almost the same. For now, though, the wagon's cramped bed feels like proof. You look at the place where everyone lay through the night. The flattened blankets, the rubbed boards, the cargo rearranged into human shapes. It was miserable. It was smoky, damp, crowded, and absurdly uncomfortable. It also worked. The wagon held, the layers held, the shared heat held, the watchers woke when needed. The children stayed warm enough. The elders made it to morning. The animals still breathe outside. The shelter does not have to be perfect to be beloved for a few hours. You step out again or lean from the flap, and the cold strikes your face with clean force. The prairie lies under a white skin, glittering where light catches the crust. The sky is still low, but it is no longer a single dark lid. There are thinner places in the cloud. The wind combs loose snow from the drifts in long, pale threads. The wagon casts a faint shadow now. That shadow feels strangely moving, as if the sun itself has written your continued existence on the snow. Someone hands up a cup with warm liquid, not hot enough to boast, but warm enough to bless the fingers. You hold it carefully. Steam lifts and vanishes. The first sip tastes of smoke, tin, and survival. Perhaps there is coffee, perhaps there is only warm water with a memory of coffee passing through it like a rumour. You drink anyway. The body does not demand luxury, it asks, quite reasonably, not to freeze. The wagon is repacked with less order than yesterday. But enough. Bedding not needed immediately is folded where it can dry later. Food is secured. Tools are kept closer to hand. Wet clothing is placed where it will not soak dry bundles. The lessons of the night have rearranged the priorities. The shelter must be ready to become a bed again if the weather worsens. No one says this too directly, but everyone packs with it in mind. As the storm loosens, the people around you loosen too. Shoulders drop, voices grow a little louder. A short laugh rises and fades. Someone makes an unkind remark about the weather and receives general agreement. Sarcasm, like coffee, returns when life becomes slightly more manageable. The wagon remains battered, cold, cramped, and surrounded by work, but it no longer feels like a coffin of canvas. It feels again like a vehicle, a household, a stubborn little room on wheels. You look back once more into the dim interior. The bedding is disturbed, the canvas frosted, the cargo dented by bodies. There is no elegance there, yet the space has carried the memory of the night in every fold. It has been bedroom, refuge, storeroom, nursery, sick room, and breathing chamber. The blizzard loosened before the people did, and now, as light gathers over the white prairie, the wagon's narrow bed becomes something almost tender proof that fear can pass through a place, and warmth can remain. You remember the blizzard's sleep before the day has fully decided what to become. Even while hands are busy and voices begin to rise again around the wagon, the night remains inside you, tucked into the joints and folded into the smell of wool. You carry it in the ache of your shoulder, in the numb memory of your toes, in the line a sleeve seam has pressed across your cheek. Sleep, if that was the word for it, did not feel like rest. It felt like staying alive while lying down. The covered wagon no longer seems like the cheerful white-topped image that future paintings might prefer. It is not a symbol from a school book. It is a cramped shelter with frost inside the roof, damp blankets, cold boards, and cargo that must be moved every time a human being wants to resemble a human being. It is also the place that held you when the prairie disappeared. Both things are true. History likes tidy categories, but lived experience has a habit of spilling beans into the bedding. You look at the canvas and think of how thin it was. One layer of cloth between breathing bodies and the open winter plain, yet that layer mattered. It stopped snow from filling your eyes. It softened the wind's force. It gave the children a ceiling to look at instead of a black sky. It made a boundary, however fragile, between outside and inside. People have always made homes from less than ideal material skins. Reeds, mud, boards, cloth, stone, memory. This wagon was not a house, but for one terrible night. It performed the oldest duty of a house. It gathered people close. By the 1850s, thousands of travellers had crossed or attempted to cross the Central Plains in wagons, moving along routes toward Oregon, California, Utah, and other western destinations. Their journeys were shaped by seasons, rivers, disease, animals, supply lines, and weather that could shift from ordinary to lethal with astonishing speed. The Great Plains were not empty stage scenery. They were a lived and contested environment, home to indigenous nations with deep knowledge of its weather, grasses, water, animals, and dangers. Emigrant travellers often understood only a thin portion of that world, and storms taught humility with no concern for anyone's schedule. You think of those who knew the plains differently. Indigenous peoples had long adapted to winter travel. Seasonal movement, shelter construction, clothing, food storage, and weather reading in ways emigrants often lacked the experience to match. A wagon family caught in a blizzard might improvise desperately inside canvas, while native communities drew on generations of knowledge about winds, camps, hides, fuel, and survival across the same broad lands. Later retelling sometimes centered only the wagon travelers, but the prairie held many histories at once. The sorrow fell on all of them, though not all met it with the same tools, rites, or circumstances. A small and easily missed detail from 19th century memory is how often extreme nights were later compressed into ordinary phrases. Slept little, very cold, storm severe, children suffered, a whole night of fear, tenderness, damp wool, animal bowl, breath, frozen bedding, and whispered prayer might shrink into a line or two. Paper did not always preserve the shivering. Ink often skipped over the exact feeling of a child's hand finding yours under the robe. It is one reason you must imagine carefully, not wildly, but gently, filling the space between plain words and human bodies. Writers and researchers continue to differ over how best to tell such stories as tales of pioneer endurance, as warnings about the costs of migration, as episodes in environmental history, as family hardship, or as part of the larger story of settlement that displaced indigenous peoples and transformed the plains. From where you sit, with a cold cup in your hand and snow still packed around the wheels, the answer feels layered. It is endurance, it is danger, it is tenderness, it is loss, it is movement, it is misunderstanding, it is people trying to sleep in a wagon because the world outside has become too cold to enter. You remember the children first, their faces buried in blankets, their questions drifting through darkness. Is the snow angry? Will the oxen be cold? Is it morning yet? Each question tied the night to something human-sized. Adults measured risk in fuel, distance, frostbite, animal strength, and lost trails. Children measured it in warmth, hunger, and whether someone familiar stayed close. Perhaps that is why their presence shaped the sleeping arrangement so completely. They drew the adults inward, toward care. You remember the elders too, their stiffness, their quiet requests, their careful pride. A cup lifted to the mouth, a shawl adjusted, a breath caught in the cold. Age changed the way the wagon slept. It made the centre more precious. It made slow movement necessary. It reminded everyone that survival was not built for the strongest alone. Night asked each body what it could endure, and the answers were not equal. You remember the women's hands, moving before dawn, tucking, warming, counting, feeling fabric for dampness, measuring food, steadying voices. You remember the men outside, bent against the wind, digging wheels free, testing harness, returning with red faces and snow on their shoulders. Not separate worlds, not simple roles carved perfectly from wood, but overlapping labour under pressure. The wagon survived because many kinds of work met in the same cold morning. And you remember the animals, patient beyond reason, breathing clouds into the storm. The oxen did not understand the family's hopes in any grand way. They knew cold, hunger, weight, command, habit. Yet their continued standing made future travel possible. Their warmth, smell, and sounds shaped the night as surely as any blanket. A wagon without animals was storage. A wagon with animals still had a chance. The bed itself remains in memory as a strange invention. Cargo became mattress, clothing became walls, flour sacks became supports, stockings became draft plugs, buffalo robe became a roof beneath the roof. You slept among everything needed for the journey. And the supplies slept around you like awkward guardians. There was no privacy, little softness, and less dignity than anyone would prefer. But there was arrangement, there was order, there was the repeated human act of making space where none had been offered. The blizzard's sleep was not peaceful, but it was intimate. It made every breath noticeable, every movement shared, every sound interpreted. It turned the wagon into a listening room, where canvas, wind, animals, and bodies spoke through the dark. You did not sleep as modern sleepers hope to sleep. Cleanly separated from weather, wrapped in quiet, certain of morning, you slept in fragments. With one ear awake, with the prairie pressing close and the people you loved closer still. Now the light has grown wider. Snow still lies over the trail, but the world has edges again. The wagon is scarred by the night. And so are you, in small invisible ways. Yet there is warmth in the memory too, fragile and stubborn. Not comfort, exactly. Something deeper than comfort, the knowledge that people can gather in a narrow place, share breath, share fear, share blankets, share silence, and make a little room for life while the storm passes over. And now, as the wagon settles into the pale quiet after the storm, let the scene grow softer around you. The wind moves farther away, no longer pressing hard against the canvas, only brushing it now and then with a tired, snowy hand. The animals stand close together, their breath rising slowly into the morning air. The children have grown quiet again, wrapped in layers that smell of smoke, wool, and the faint sweetness of dried apples. The elders rest with their shawls drawn close. The cups are put away, the blankets are folded. The boards creak once, then become still. You do not have to dig the wheels out now. You do not have to find the trail. You do not have to check the knots, scrape the snow, coax the fire, or count the flour. All of that belongs to the waking world. And the waking world can wait outside the edge of this story. For now, you are simply warm enough. You feel the heavy robe over your knees, the soft pressure of a folded coat beneath your head, the slow breathing of others nearby. The prairie is wide, but it is no longer frightening. It is only white and quiet, stretching beneath a sky beginning to brighten. The canvas roof glows gently above you. A few last crystals of frost loosen and disappear. The storm has passed through, and what remains is stillness. So let your own breathing become slow. Let the wagon rock only in memory. Let the snow soften every sound. Let the long road fade into distance, and let the little shelter hold. You're safe inside the hush now, carried by warmth, by darkness, by the fading whisper of wind over the plains. Sweet dreams.